Chapter 11:28. God at the golden sword radiance seemed as though it was going to cut through the heavens. The towering golden light blasted towards the emissary with an unstoppable force. The emissary, who had been disdainful all this while, finally revealed a look of fear. He frantically formed seals with his hands. Just as he was about to counterattack, his body stiffened. He looked towards the north and gave up resisting, allowing the golden light to devour him. Dazzling golden light and boundless power wreaked havoc for a full 7 minutes. Neither Jiao Qi, Meng Huairong, nor Qi Mei could look directly at it. Yi Zichen had even sealed off his vision before releasing it. The light dissipated. What was left on the plain was a bottomless ravine. It was as if the space had been sliced into two by that sword's skill. Ha! The envoy disappeared after being swallowed by the golden light. Yi Zichen sat on the ground and panted heavily as if he had just survived a disaster. His entire body was drenched in sweat. Just now, when he'd faced that Earth Supreme, he'd truly been scared out of his wits. Fortunately, he was used to big storms and had a good mental fortitude. Otherwise, he would have to report to the Netherworld River. At that moment, Qi Mei hurried over with Jiao Qi and Meng Huairong. The two heavenly Yao of the Yao Ceiling Pagoda immediately rushed over to Yi Zichen's side to observe the situation. Qi Mei, on the other hand, covered her mouth with her small hand. She looked at the nearly endless ravine that was dozens of feet wide in front of her, and her small face was filled with shock. "Little brother, did you do this? Don't tell me you killed the envoy?" Yi Zichen looked at Yi Zichen in astonishment, then narrowed his eyes and smiled mockingly. "I don't know if that emissary is dead or not, but I'm not. How about it? Are you disappointed? They deliberately brought him here and had him face a 9th stage Earth Supreme by himself. They hadn't told him about the Shao family's enmity with the Yao race, putting him in danger. He couldn't contact the Yao Ceiling Pagoda, so it was definitely Qi Mei's doing. This made him even more likely to die. It would be hilarious if Yi Zichen could still calmly chat with her at a time like this. "Little brother, what are you saying? Let's not talk about this. The Gao family has sent someone over. Let's pretend to be the Shao family's special envoy and trick these treasures over." Regardless of whether Yi Zichen cooperated or not, Qi Mei had already donned the black robes and returned one to each of them. Not long after, it was just as Qi Mei said. In the distance there was a group of about 5 people on horseback. "Hurry up and put it on. The special envoy doesn't know you, but do you think the Gao family doesn't know you? Let's talk about it later. We've already come this far. We can't let all our efforts go to waste." Yi Zichen gave Qi Mei a deep, meaningful look, then donned the black robes. When Jiao Qi and Meng Huairong saw that their master had donned them, they did the same. About half an hour later, the Gao family's group had arrived. At the very front of this group was the eldest son of the Gao clan, Gao Yunting. He was followed by 4 of his trusted aides. When they saw the chasm Yi Zichen had created, they were all astonished. They looked at Yi Zichen and the others warily. "You're here?" Who cared what they thought? Qi Mei had already spoken. "Esteemed envoy." Although he was somewhat suspicious, Gao Yunting didn't dare offend her. He bowed deeply. His 4 trusted aides also followed suit and bowed in greeting. "Did you bring everything?" Qi Mei nodded calmly at them, then spoke again. Gao Yunting revealed a hesitant expression when he heard this. His gaze descended onto the ravine as he spoke. "Esteemed envoy, this place. Although this was his first time here, there were obvious signs of battle. The surrounding space wasn't particularly stable, and the chasm looked as if it had just formed. If he guessed right, a supreme-level battle had taken place here before they'd entered. He wasn't sure exactly how many Supremes there had been, but in any case, immortal kings couldn't possibly create something like this. This place? When I came down here, a few of my enemies found out. Just now, they exchanged blows with the main body, but the main body had already forced them to retreat. They're my attendants, and they were heavily injured while protecting me. Then esteemed envoy isn't injured, is he? You don't need to worry about that. Give me what you need and you can go back. Chi Mei vividly displayed the impatience of a major figure like the Divine Mountain's envoy when dealing with small fries in the lower lands. She repeatedly urged him to complete the transaction, but Gao Yunting held the ring in his hand for a long time without handing it over. Since there'd been a battle, who could be sure that the envoy before them was the real one? What if the envoy's enemies were here to exact revenge? Esteemed envoy. All right, I know what you're worried about. With that, Chi Mei narrowed her eyes and sent Gao Yunting a transmission. Not long after, his gaze changed, and he looked at Chi Mei with a respectful and friendly gaze. Can you confirm it now? I'm sure. Please don't blame me, esteemed envoy. I'm doing this for the sake of our transaction. The transmission Chi Mei had sent Gao Yunting was the secret code his father had told him before he'd left. Identities could be faked, but the secret code couldn't be known by anyone else. If Chi Mei could say the secret code, then she was undoubtedly the envoy. No matter. Gao Yunting waved his hand magnanimously, then handed over the fire attribute spatial ring without hesitation. Chi Mei took the ring and glanced indifferently at the treasures inside. Gao Yunting cupped his hands in greeting. Esteemed envoy, since the transaction is complete, I'll return to report on my mission. Wait a moment. At that moment, Chi Mei called out to him. Gao Yunting immediately turned around. Esteemed envoy, is there anything else you need? A jade-green ring appeared in Chi Mei's hand. 2 beams of light shot out from the fire-type ring and into the jade-green ring. Chi Mei then tossed the jade-green ring towards Gao Yunting. Gao Yunting reflexively caught it. A look of confusion appeared on his face as Chi Mei spoke. Chapter 11:29. The Yao Ceiling Pagoda. The transfer of resources concluded. Gao Yunting, who'd received 20% of the resources, was incredibly grateful to Chi Mei. The Gao family had handed over a considerable amount of resources. Even 20% was more than the entire Sky Great District's resources could match. This 20% of resources was almost equivalent to the lifetime wealth of 10 celestial kings. As he watched the Gao clansmen leave, Yi Zichen looked at Chi Mei, his thoughts racing. Giving them 20% had been ingenious. Gao Yunting's suspicions of them had shifted directly to the 20%. Here, we agreed that we'd each get half. She tossed a ring at Yi Zichen. Yi Zichen caught it and scanned its contents with his immortal awareness. When he saw the number of spiritual medicines, weapons, and talismans, even Yi Zichen couldn't help but gasp. No wonder Gao Yunting had thanked him profusely. 20% of his resources was enough to establish a first-rate family clan in the Sky Great District. However, Yi Zichen wasn't Gao Yunting. He wasn't so easily bribed. He put the ring away, then looked at Chi Mei. Shouldn't we talk about what happened before? Jiao Qi and Meng Huairong froze, then looked at Chi Mei with a hint of reverence. Chi Mei shot them a meaningful glance, then put on an adorable expression. She pouted her lips and blinked repeatedly, then leaned over to Yi Zichen and grabbed his hand. Sweetie, what are you doing? I didn't do it on purpose. You didn't do it on purpose? Yi Zichen smiled calmly at her. He wasn't a narrow-minded person. Although he'd been in grave danger, in the end, he hadn't suffered any serious injuries. Rather than using this as an excuse to argue with Chi Mei endlessly, he wanted to know why she'd done it. Besides, he could sense that she hadn't actually wanted to kill him. You tricked me into coming here, then sent Jiao Qi, Meng Huairong, and the others away from me. Chi Mei, to tell the truth, I can't see through you. Sweetie, are you trying to say that I'm a schemer? I'm very pure, okay? As she spoke, she rested her chin on her hands, blinked her big, watery eyes, and shook her head back and forth. Jiao Qi and Meng Huairong both looked at Chi Mei with indescribable expressions. In truth, they'd been wondering just what this lord was planning. Anyone with a sound mind would be able to tell that Chi Mei was doing this on purpose. With Jiao Qi and the others treating his injuries, the lack of celestial spiritual energy from using the heaven-plundering technique had mostly recovered. Since she didn't want to tell the truth, there was no need for him to pursue the matter. Then let's part ways here. It's better if we don't meet again after this. Yi Zichen led Jiao Qi and the others away, but before he'd taken more than a few steps, Qi Mei ran up to him, spread her arms wide, and blocked his path. If you don't forgive me, I won't let you go. When he saw this, Yi Zichen couldn't help but sigh. He tilted his head and looked at Qi Mei's remorseful expression, his eyes filled with faint helplessness. Then what do you want me to do? I already told you. I can't see through you. My situation in the God realm is like treading on thin ice. There's no way I'm going to befriend someone I can't see through. You're very mysterious and you know all sorts of secrets that ordinary people can't. Also, the few times you've appeared by my side, I can sense that you're testing me. I don't like that. Alright, then I'll just tell you the truth. Qi Mei seemed genuinely worried that Yi Zichen would get angry. She frowned and pursed her lips. Actually, I was just testing you. Yi Zichen wasn't surprised by her answer. Just now, he'd already said he sensed that Qi Mei was testing him. He didn't respond at all. He simply looked at her calmly, ready to hear what she had to say next. You have the Yao Ceiling Pagoda, right? Even though he had guessed that Qi Mei would know about the existence of the Yao Ceiling Pagoda, hearing it from her own mouth was still shocking. After a brief internal struggle, Yi Zichen nodded. At that moment, Qi Mei spoke up. I'm sure you know how important the Yao Ceiling Pagoda is. You might not know much about it, but I can tell you right now that this Yao Ceiling Pagoda is a treasure that even the God Emperor, Emperor Hades, and the Demon Emperor value. Yi Zichen instinctively rubbed the ring on his finger. The Yao Ceiling Pagoda was actually connected to the God Emperor? Just that alone was enough for the Demon Emperor, Emperor Hades, and Emperor Hades to value it. This made his heart sink. What's so special about the Yao Ceiling Pagoda? Once you open the 4th floor of the pagoda, you'll naturally find out. What you've seen so far is just the tip of the iceberg. When you open all of them, you'll naturally understand why these 3 venerable sovereigns value this suppressing demon tower so much. Qi Mei didn't directly answer Yi Zichen's question, but her expression was solemn. I need to know what you're planning after you get rid of the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. I need to know if you have the ability to protect it. If you don't, even if I can't use the pagoda, I have to take it back. I absolutely can't let it fall into the hands of the other 3 emperors. I've tested you so many times because I want to work with you. Work together. Yi Zichen knit his brows. The Yao Ceiling Pagoda requires the Tao of the 5 elements to open. You cultivate the Tao of the 5 elements, so the Yao Ceiling Pagoda can only be used in your hands. Furthermore, based on my understanding of you, I can tell that your attainments in the Tao of the 5 elements aren't low. That last sword strike in particular moved me. As she spoke, Qi Mei's eyes flashed with a faint smile. She didn't try to act cute. Her smile was filled with satisfaction and genuine joy. At the same time, she reached out and smiled sweetly. Since the 5 elements Great Emperor chose you, we're in the same boat. Since you've taken the Yao Ceiling Pagoda, you're bound to oppose the God Emperor. In that case, we welcome you to join us. Her fair hand hovered in front of Yi Zichen, but as he stared at it, he didn't respond. You? Who exactly are you? Us? Haven't you already guessed? We're the 5 elements Great Emperors. Descendants. Yi Zichen didn't answer directly whether or not to join them. Instead, he asked them to give him some time to think it over. When he left this space, the space next to Qi Mei, who was left behind, distorted, and a man appeared. Chapter 1130. Chiron Fei's surrender, miss. Are we just going to let him go? When the envoy saw Qi Mei, he bowed deeply to her, then glanced in bewilderment at Yi Zichen's departing figure. Qi Mei's eyes flashed with a faint smile, and her lips curled into a smile. So what if we don't let him go? Are we supposed to kill him? But the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. The envoy hesitated. They'd come here for the Yao Ceiling Pagoda after all. However, they hadn't gotten it, and they'd even let Yi Zichen go. Let's leave the Yao Ceiling Pagoda to him. Since the ancestor chose him for his landscape painting, that naturally means he approves of him. Although the Yao Ceiling Pagoda belongs to our clan, no one in our clan can learn the Tao of the 5 elements. Even if we snatch it back, it'll be nothing more than scrap metal. If we leave it to him, it might be even more effective. With that, Qi Mei changed the subject and narrowed her eyes. Have you dealt with the Shao family's envoy? Yes. With that, a middle-aged man appeared in the envoy's hands. At his waist was a residence medallion with the word, Shao, engraved on it. He was clearly dead. There were no fluctuations of aura around him at all. Qi Mei glanced coolly at the corpse, but inwardly, she couldn't help but laugh coldly. She rubbed the spatial ring the Gao family had given her. This is just the beginning. The Shao family, the God Emperor. Let's settle our grudges slowly. Suddenly, she thought of Yi Zichen. Despite herself, her sinister expression transformed into a warm smile. That guy might not know yet that the 5 elements' great emperor was the Yao Emperor. The Yao Ceiling Pagoda doesn't just hold Yao, there are gods and demons too. I wonder what his expression will be like when he opens the 4th floor. Right, I still haven't given him that aura-concealing treasure. Now I have another reason to see him. First miss. The emissary looked at Qi Mei with a silly smile and shouted a few times. Qi Mei came back to her senses. She looked at the special envoy and said with a frown, "What is it? What should we do with the Shao family? Just now, when the Gao family came, why didn't we kill him? If he goes back and says something, then killing him will only raise their guard. Don't worry, he definitely won't say anything." With an indifferent smile, the corners of Qi Mei's mouth curled up as she spoke. Let's leave him here and return to the clan. By the way, send some people to keep an eye on the Shao family. If there's anything special, let me know. Gao Yunting held 20% of the clan's resources. Gao Yunting held on to 20% of the clan's resources, but he didn't immediately return them to the clan. At this time, he was sitting in his room. His 4 trusted aides were also here. There was a space ring on the table in the room. It was the space ring that Qi Mei had given him earlier. Everything was going according to Qi Mei's plan. 20% of the resources stirred Gao Yunting's greed. Although he was the eldest son of the Gao family and the most likely successor to the position of family head, but even with his current status, the resources he could use within the clan were few and far between. More importantly, the patriarch's attitude was ambiguous, and Gao Ruelong seemed to be in the running for patriarch. If he could keep 20% of the resources, he would be able to nurture his own forces. At that time, even if he didn't get the position of patriarch, he wouldn't be suppressed to death. However, there was no such thing as an impenetrable wall in the world. If the clan head were to find out about this, even if he was the eldest son of the first wife, he would not be able to escape death. Gao Yunting couldn't make a decision right now. He could only look at his trusted aides and ask them, "Everyone, do you think we should return these resources to the family?" The few trusted aides hesitated and did not speak. At this moment, the door to the room was pushed open. Everyone in the room was on high alert as they looked at the door. "Why are you here?" The one who opened the door was Kai Renfei, who was staying with the Gao family. He held a folding fan in his hand and looked like a counselor from ancient times. He chuckled and closed the door, then bowed deeply to Gao Yunting. "Young Master Yunting, aren't you supposed to be Gao Ruelong's dog? What are you doing here? Could it be that Gao Ruelong asked you to come? Tell me, what did he want you to tell me?" The Gao family's younger generation had never stopped fighting, and Gao Yunting and Gao Ruelong were at the forefront of it all. Both of them were sons of the patriarch, and the most likely candidates for the position of patriarch. They constantly fought against each other, both openly and covertly. However, in Kai Renfei's eyes, these two young masters were like chickens pecking at each other. Neither of them had any brains. Young Master Yunting, I didn't come here late at night to deliver a message from Gao Ruelong. I believe my men contacted you a few days ago. In truth, I'm here to surrender. Kai Renfei cupped his hands and chuckled. Is that so? Gao Yunting glanced at him indifferently. He didn't particularly trust Kai Renfei's words. Kai Renfei had always been Gao Ruelong's lackey, and had often given him advice and advice. Now, he suddenly wanted to join Gao Yunting's side. Although he'd heard that Gao Ruelong had beaten him, who could say for sure that wasn't just an act? There's no need to be suspicious, young Master Yunting. I came here with sincerity, said Kai Renfei politely. When Gao Yunting heard this, he didn't say anything. Instead, he looked at him indifferently. He wanted to see just how sincere Kai Renfei was. Then, he saw Kai Renfei's gaze fall on the ring on the table. When he sensed this gaze, Gao Yunting hurriedly put the ring away. However, he heard Kai Renfei speak up. Young Master Yunting, there's no need to tidy it up. I came here for it. What do you mean? Gao Yunting frowned. He absolutely couldn't let anyone else know about the resources. Young Master, you're definitely upset about whether or not to hand over the 20%, right? My advice to you is not to hand it over. Everyone in the room instantly tensed up. Gao Yunting's eyes were filled with shock as he stared ahead. How could he possibly know? They'd only returned to the estate less than an hour ago, and only the 5 of them knew about this. Just how had this information gotten out? All of a sudden, he turned to look at a few of his trusted aides, but all of them shook their heads. Young Master, don't be nervous. I didn't get this information from your trusted aides, but I can't tell you how I learned it. But I can't tell you how I know, but I can assure you that apart from us, there is no 7th person who knows about this. Kai Renfei strolled into Gao Yunting's room, then took out a command medallion and slapped it on the table. Chapter 1131. Sowing dissension. The medallion was golden, and there were several lightning inscriptions on its surface. When they saw the medallion, Gao Yunting and the others in the room were shocked. This medallion was the family head's medallion. Anyone who held this medallion was the head of the Gao family. Whether it was the elders or the other members of the family, everyone had to respect the person who held this medallion. Gao Yunting was stunned. This medallion had always been in his father's hands. Why was it in Kai Renfei's? He was a member of the Kai family, but he was only staying here temporarily. There was no way his father would give him the medallion. How did you get your hands on this medallion? The atmosphere in the room was tense. Gao Yunting stared intently at Kai Renfei, who stood across from them. His trusted aides inconspicuously took a few steps forward, surrounding Kai Renfei. The situation didn't look good. Kai Renfei wasn't a member of the family, but he had the family head's medallion. Gao Yunting could easily kill him on the pretext of stealing the medallion. Young Master Yunting, I already said that this is a sign of my sincerity. Kai Renfei smiled faintly, but didn't explain himself. He carefully put the medallion away. Do you know why I told you to keep the 20% of the resources safe? In truth, I obtained this medallion from Gao Ruelong. When he heard this, Gao Yunting's body trembled uncontrollably, his head buzzing. He'd obtained the medallion from Gao Ruelong? Didn't that mean his father was going to hand over the position of family head to Gao Ruelong? Impossible! Gao Yunting roared, his eyes bloodshot. He was the eldest son of the Gao family, and his mother was the first wife of the family head. Ever since he was a child, his father had taught him how to be the future family head. For more than 10 years, his father had paved the way for him, helping him build up a faction of trusted aides. Gao Yunting had worked hard to become the future family head. However, 10 years ago, his mother had passed away from illness. His father had taken Gao Ruelong's mother as his wife, and they had a son. From then on, the family head's feelings for Gao Yunting grew more and more ambiguous. He no longer mentioned the position of family head to him, and in private, he began to build up support for Gao Ruelong. He saw all of this, but he didn't say anything. But now, he was almost 40 years old, and he had been waiting for the succession of the patriarch for a full 30 years. But now, Kai Renfei was telling him that the patriarch's warrant was given to Gao Ruelong? This is impossible, this is impossible. Gao Yunting squeezed Kai Renfei's neck with all his might. Kai Renfei's face turned red, and he repeatedly slapped Gao Yunting's arm. Bang! After throwing Kai Renfei to the ground, Kai Renfei curled up on the ground and retched for a long time before getting up from the ground. The warrant is right here. It's not up to you to believe it or not. You're trying to sow discord, aren't you? If Gao Ruelong really had the warrant, why would he give it to you? Suddenly, Gao Yunting's gaze darkened. I know that you've never received a mother's love since you were a child, and you resent my father for stealing your mother to the Gao family, right? But if you want to use this kind of method to sow discord in the Gao family, I can only say that you are too naive. When Kai Renfei heard this, he smiled indifferently. If you don't believe me, young Master Yunting, then forget about it. As for how I obtained the warrant, you can investigate it yourself. Gao Ruelong's residence is currently hosting a banquet. I took advantage of his drunken stupor to steal the warrant to inform young Master Yunting. I told you, this is my sincerity, but you didn't show me your sincerity. Since that's the case, just pretend I never came here tonight. Don't talk about the warrant, and I won't talk about your resources either. With that, Kai Renfei didn't hesitate. He pushed open the door and left. Gao Yunting hesitated for a moment, then frowned and said, Why are you helping me? Why are you helping me? Ever since Kai Renfei came to the Gao family, he had always been on Gao Ruelong's side because of his mother. Over the past half-year, Gao Ruelong had lost face in front of his father several times because of Kai Renfei's help. Now, however, Kai Renfei had suddenly switched sides. Gao Yunting found it hard to believe Kai Renfei's true intentions. It's not that I want to help you, said Kai Renfei. I also need to inherit the position of family head. You know that our Kai family provoked someone we can't afford to provoke. That's why the family sent our younger generation to live with the Gao family. Kai Renfei frowned, his expression dark. As the future family head of the Kai family, I naturally have to consider the interests of the clan. Your Gao family is clearly capable of protecting my Kai family, but I also need to choose a suitable partner between you and Gao Ruelong. Before, I was thinking of Gao Ruelong, but he humiliated me that day and even mentioned my mother. I will deliver the warrant to Gao Ruelong without anyone knowing. As for young Master Yunting, you're on your own. He coldly turned around and left Gao Yunting's courtyard. The room fell silent for a moment. After a long moment of silence, Gao Yunting's trusted aides couldn't help but speak up. What should we do? They'd always treated Gao Yunting as one of the family head's most trusted aides. In their eyes, the position of family head would definitely fall to Gao Yunting. But now, Kai Renfei was telling them that the family head had given the warrant to Gao Ruelong. Should we discreetly ask the family head about this? Gao Yunting's heart was in turmoil. Earlier, he'd said that Kai Renfei was trying to sow discord, but in reality, he'd just been testing the waters. In his heart, he truly suspected that his father had passed the position of family head to Gao Ruelong. Kai Renfei's last words in particular had raised his suspicions to a new high. He and Gao Ruelong had always stood on opposite sides. If Gao Ruelong really became family head, his future days would be miserable. Rather than wait for death, why not go investigate whether Gao Ruelong hosted any banquets in the past few days? If he did, Gao Yunting had already made up his mind. He wouldn't be able to get any answers. If you're heartless, then I'll be unjust. Little did they know, Kai Renfei, who just left Gao Yunting's residence, smiled sinisterly. He reached into his robes and took out a command medallion. It was the one Gao Yunting and the others believed to be the family head's warrant. With a forceful squeeze, the token was crushed into an iron ball and thrown into the pond. At the same time, his lips curved into a playful smile. Gao Yunting absolutely believes me now. All I have to do is push him a little, and he'll definitely rebel. When that happens, I'll shift the blame to Yi Zichen. Everything will be under my control. He didn't like either the Gao family or Yi Zichen. Given his own strength, he couldn't possibly be a match for either faction. Since that was the case, he'd just have them fight. All he needed to do was sit back and reap the spoils. What Gao family? What Yi Zichen? They're nothing but playthings in my palms. Kai Renfei smiled sinisterly, then looked up into the sky. Chapter 1132. The Parliament of Stars. Half a year passed in the blink of an eye. When he learned that Gao Ruilong's residence was indeed holding a banquet, Gao Yunting didn't hesitate. He left 20% of the clan's resources for himself and began recruiting in secret. He did everything he could to raise his own faction. This was all to nip trouble in the bud. He'd already given Gao Ruilong the family head's medallion, so he could announce his succession at any time. Furthermore, his father hadn't summoned him in the past 6 months. Even when he made a deal with the Shao family, he hadn't received any rewards. Gao Ruilong had grown even more arrogant during the past 6 months. This only confirmed Kai Renfei's suspicions. All Gao Yunting could do now was seize every second he had. If that day really came, then he'd rebel. During this time, the Sky Great District's Gao family was in turmoil. The lands beneath the Divine Mountains weren't idle either. Yi Zichen's massive sale of sea condensing pills was finally progressing as he'd hoped. Countless Immortal King experts ascended to the Divine Mountains. Quite a few tried to persuade them to wait a few years, but they'd waited too long. Now that they had a chance to ascend, how could they give it up? In an instant, countless peak-level factions stepped down from power and began fighting each other. After countless years of silence, their territory finally fell into chaos. In these troubled times, upheaval's development grew even more ferocious. In just half a year, they'd swept through more than 50% of the factions beneath the Divine Mountains. Either they merged with upheaval, or they became subordinates of upheaval. In short, upheaval was now, without a doubt, the #1 faction beneath the Divine Mountains. Boss, this is upheaval's development plan for the next few years. Please take a look. With the support of Yi Zichen's resources, Wei Jie's strength had reached the peak sky immortal level. It could be said that he was riding the crest of success. Upheaval had over 100 branches, and over 100 million members. As the head of the gang, he was in charge of countless Immortal King branch leaders and elders. He was quite content. More than 70% of the Divine Mountain's secret realms had become subordinates of upheaval. Yi Zichen no longer had to worry about the gang's finances. His daily income was more than enough to keep the gang running, and he still had plenty left over. However, Yi Zichen wasn't a money grubber. He'd only been so greedy in the past because of upheaval. Now that upheaval's operations were under control, he ordered all of upheaval's excess profits to be converted into pills and distributed to the gang's outstanding members. Yi Zichen didn't want to become the richest man in the world. He wanted an army that could make even the Divine Mountains tremble. After placing the jade slip on the table, Wei Jie reported the situation. Boss, with the resources you've provided, upheaval isn't just under the northern Divine Mountain anymore. We've taken control of more than half of the 9 Divine Mountains factions. There are nearly 10,000 Immortal King experts in the sect, hundreds of thousands of Heaven Immortal experts, and countless Earth Immortals and Human Immortals. We've also practically monopolized the secret realms of the 9 great Divine Mountains. The resources we obtain from them every day are already enough for the sect to maintain itself. We've also followed your suggestion and exchanged all the extra resources for spirit stones, medicinal pills, and other items that are beneficial to cultivation for the sect members to use. In this half a year, I've also established several academies with Immortal King Realm experts as teachers. I've assigned the more talented members of the gang to study in the academies. These students will be our sharpest swords in the future. Although Wei Jie's tone was calm, he couldn't help but feel proud as he spoke. A year ago, he'd been nothing more than a small squad leader in the Axe Gang. Who would have guessed that a year later, he'd become the leader of a gang with hundreds of millions of members? Yi Zichen had given him all of this. Yi Zichen didn't pay much attention to the rest, but when Wei Jie mentioned the academies, he couldn't help but nod in satisfaction. Not bad. The academy's idea is excellent. In the future, they'll definitely be our sharpest swords. There's no lack of geniuses beneath the 9 divine mountains. You absolutely can't let anyone with talent go to waste. I understand. Wei Jie nodded. I won't look at the plans. You've done well lately, and I'm very satisfied. I'm also confident that your future plans won't disappoint me. Yi Zichen pushed the jade slip back to Wei Jie. When he saw this, Wei Jie's expression inexplicably stiffened. Boss, how about you take a look? Wei Jie's eyes were filled with apprehension. Yi Zichen couldn't help but frown, but he still didn't look at the jade slip. I won't look at your plan and let you do whatever you want. Are you still not satisfied? He doesn't mean that. At this moment, the assistant star, Bai Shaoxing, curled his lips. He had been following Wei Jie and the others to expand their territory, so he had some understanding of the internal situation. Old Bai. Wei Jie couldn't help but furrow his brows, signaling him not to say anything. Bai Shaoxing rolled his eyes at him with a frown. You've already said it like this. What else can't you say? Moreover, if boss saw it, wouldn't he also know the situation? When he heard this, Yi Zichen's expression darkened despite himself. He turned to look at Wei Jie. What's going on? Actually, it's not that big of a deal. In response to Yi Zichen's questioning, Wei Jie licked his lips and smiled wryly. It's like this. After about the time it takes to brew a cup of tea, Wei Jie explained the situation, and Yi Zichen got the gist of it. During this period of time, a large number of immortal kings had ascended. As a result, the territories of the lower divine mountains had been shaken. Countless factions had begun annexing and plundering the territories and resources of the clans that had lost their immortal kings. Wei Jie naturally didn't care about the small squabbles, but there was one faction he had no choice but to take seriously. It was called the Parliament of Stars. This gang had appeared out of nowhere. It wasn't a faction that had once existed in the lower divine mountains. Just like Upheaval, this gang had abruptly risen to prominence in these chaotic times. Their starting point was Blue Bird City, located at the foot of the southern divine mountain, near the river Styx. Upheaval had expanded from the extreme north. By the time they passed through the central divine mountain, they'd taken control of almost all the factions in the south. They occupied more than 30% of the resources in the lower divine mountains. As for the remaining 20%, they were divided among countless smaller factions. Although the Parliament of Stars' overall strength couldn't compare to Upheaval's, it wasn't an existence that could be easily trampled upon. Its existence had already begun to rival Upheaval. During this period of time, Upheaval couldn't act against the smaller factions. If they dared, the other factions would definitely attach themselves to the Parliament of Stars, which would make things even more troublesome. The Parliament of Stars seemed happy with the current situation. They stopped expanding their territory. Now it was a contest of patience. The Parliament of Stars. Yi Zichen smiled indifferently. He hadn't expected someone else to think the same way as him. It seemed this person had some tricks up his sleeve. However, he couldn't let his existence become a stumbling block to Upheaval's progress. Chapter 1133. Attention on the Divine Mountain, young master, the invaders have all been dealt with. Just as Yi Zichen was pondering how to deal with the Parliament of Stars, Jiao Qi and the others entered his room. When Wei Jie came to report the situation, they sensed that someone was acting strangely in Ice Blue City, so they went out to investigate. This situation was no longer strange. Groups of people would come to Ice Blue City every few days. However, with Jiao Qi and the others around, there was no danger that could get rid of them all. In just half a year, just the wealth he had obtained from these invaders was equivalent to over 50% of what he had obtained from selling sea-condensing pills. Yi Zichen nodded calmly at them, then returned his attention to the Parliament of Stars. In truth, Yi Zichen's main goal in selling the sea-condensing pills was to get a rough idea of the strength of those who could descend from the Divine Mountains. After more than half a year, he had a rough understanding that the strongest cultivators who could descend from the Divine Mountains were only 9th stage Earth Supremes. Sky Supremes shouldn't be able to descend to the lower realms from the Divine Mountains. Or rather, descending would require a hefty price. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for the Divine Mountains clans to not send out Sky Supremes and above to deal with them after wiping out so many Earth Supremes. Since there were no Sky Supremes present, Yi Zichen was invincible. Jiao Qi, your subordinate is here. When he heard Yi Zichen's call, Jiao Qi immediately took a step forward. Tidy up the spiritual herbs, prized artifacts and talismans in the general goods shop. We'll follow Wei Jie to meet that so-called Parliament of Stars. At the same time, on the central Divine Mountain, in the Shao Manor that was in charge of the lightning punishment. It's been half a year since we sent people there. The others have all returned, but the one who went to the northern Divine Mountain hasn't returned. What's going on? Shao Yan furrowed his brows as he looked at the young man holding a tome in the hall. The young man bowed in response. I tried to contact the people at the foot of the northern Divine Mountain, but I don't know if the message wasn't sent, or if they pretended not to have received it. In any case, I didn't get a response. Therefore, I have already sent people to investigate. It shouldn't be long before we get the result. Shao Yin nodded after hearing this answer. At the same time, the young man holding the book spoke again. That's right. However, a few particularly interesting things have happened in the lower lands recently. Tell me about it. Ever since he'd assumed the position of family head, Shao Yan felt the burden on his shoulders grow heavier and heavier. That was especially true after the profound pavilion forced their way into the Lightning Emperor's estate. He'd lost all face and was the subject of much criticism. Fortunately, in the past 100 years, people had gradually forgotten about this matter. However, when the people from the Lightning Emperor's manor faced off against the people from the Profound Pavilion, they always felt like they were at a disadvantage. Now that there was something interesting, he wanted to listen to it and relax. Not long ago, a Master Yi suddenly appeared in the lower lands and started selling sea-condensing pills in large quantities. In the past half a year, the number of ascenders from our 9 divine mountains has increased by several dozen times. A few dozen times? Shao Yin couldn't help but arch his brows. Which faction is he from? No, that's not right. If he really was from some force, then he wouldn't have sold it to other immortal kings under the divine mountains. The young man holding the book chuckled. He's not a member of any clan, so it's easy to imagine how much wealth he made from selling so many sea-condensing pills. Clans from all 9 divine mountains sent people to seize them, but they were all killed by Master Ye's subordinates. Not a single one survived. The sale of sea-condensing pills directly affected the territory of the lower lands. Countless immortal kings ascended, and the lower lands fell into chaos. Amidst this chaos, a gang called Upheaval appeared out of nowhere. They've already monopolized over 50% of the lower lands factions. It seems this gang belongs to Master Yi as well. Although the young man spoke in a relaxed manner, Shao Yan's expression darkened when he heard this. There was no way he could take everything as lightly as he'd imagined. Although the territory of the lower lands couldn't affect the upper lands, this so-called Master Ye's intentions were clear. Especially his gang's name, Upheaval. selling off sea-condensing pills and seizing territory and resources. All of this was part of his plan. His true goal was most likely to be just like his gang's name. He wanted to plunge the lower lands, and even the Divine Mountains, into chaos. What concerned Xiao Yan even more was that Master Yi had actually managed to wipe out all the people his clans had sent down. Although he wasn't sure how strong his clans were, they were absolutely Earth Supreme level experts. Most people in the lower lands were below the Immortal King level. Even if there were Earth Supremes, they were sent down by certain clans. It could be said that Earth Supremes were invincible existences in the lower lands. Yet Master Yi had managed to wipe out Earth Supremes, and not just a single one at that. Send someone to investigate this Master Yi. Although Yi Zichen was only active in the lower lands, his actions had already made it impossible for those above to ignore him. My lord, there's no need to worry about that. I investigated him half a month ago. The young man holding the ancient book smiled and said, "The interesting things that I mentioned were also discovered from the investigation." "What interesting things?" "That Master Yi might have the Yao Ceiling Pagoda," said the youth. Boom! Xiao Yan's aura erupted uncontrollably from within him. He gripped the armrests of his chair tightly, his body trembling slightly as he gulped incessantly. He stared fixedly at the youth in the hall. The Yao Ceiling Pagoda. The God Emperor, Emperor Hades, and Demon Emperor viewed it with great importance, even to the shamans. Rumor had it that the pagoda hid an earth-shattering secret. However, the Yao Ceiling Pagoda had vanished after the Five Elements' Great Emperor's death. Why had it reappeared? Are you sure? Under the pressure of his divine power, the youth's tome glowed faintly, forming a barrier in front of him that blocked out Xiao Yan's aura. At the same time, the youth smiled and nodded. There's at least an 80% chance of that happening. After receiving the youth's confirmation, Xiao Yan completely retracted his aura. He sat in his chair for a long time without saying a word. However, the youth with the tome finally spoke. His Excellency the God Emperor has been searching for news of the Yao Ceiling Pagoda all this time. Should we tell him? No. To everyone's surprise, Xiao Yan, who was sitting in his chair, stared at him and refused. At the same time, he revealed a grave expression. Do you remember the legend between the Five Elements' Great Emperor and the God Emperor? My tome says that because the Five Elements' Great Emperor doted on his nine-tailed fox wife too much, he betrayed the God race. When the God Emperor discovered this, he killed him, said the youth, flipping through his tome. That's right, that's what they say. Xiao Yan nodded solemnly, but he couldn't stop sighing. Chapter 1134. A rather forceful Rule Yi Zichen was completely unaware of the Xiao family's attention. Even if he did, he wouldn't care. After all, he'd done all this to attract the attention of the Divine Mountains. He'd used sea-condensing pills as bait to lure the families of the Divine Mountains into sending people down. Yi Zichen was starting to get bored. Although Ice Blue City was a gathering place for information, there was still little news about the Yao realm and the River Styx. Yi Zichen decided he might as well leave. Half a month later, in Blue Sky City on the southern Divine Mountain. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that this was the most prosperous city in the lower lands. Ice Blue City's prosperity was due to the existence of the Skyspan Trading Company. Blue Sky City's prosperity had a lot to do with its geographical location. Blue Sky City bordered the River Styx. Beyond the River Styx were Yao territory, while the Demon Realm bordered it. You could say that Blue Sky City was the hub of the Yao, God, and Demon realms. It was easy to spot demons and Yao, and the Parliament of Stars headquarters was located here as well. Whoa, this city looks much bigger than Ice Blue City. Yi Zichen couldn't help but sigh. Due to the Parliament of Stars' relationship with Upheaval, and Wei Jie being Upheaval's gang leader, the Parliament of Stars was monitoring his every move. This city was also the Parliament of Stars headquarters. Although he'd wanted to accompany Yi Zichen, due to his status, he'd given up. As a newcomer, Yi Zichen didn't have Jiao Qi and Meng Huairong protect him. Instead, he had them stay within the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. A female Sky Yao followed him. Her true form was a snow rabbit, but she was only a mid-stage Yao King. Although this level of strength was already quite strong in the lower lands, it wasn't particularly eye-catching. Yi Zichen had remained on the northern Divine Mountain ever since arriving in the God Realm. This was his first time traveling so far, so it was best to be careful. It would be best if he didn't draw too much attention. That way, he'd be able to gather intelligence. As for Meng Huairong, who'd been clamoring about tagging along, Yi Zichen directly rejected her. Perhaps she really was familiar with Yi Zichen. At first, she was worried about their relationship as master and servant, so her behavior was somewhat restrained. But after half a year, she dared roll her eyes at Yi Zichen. Just like that, Yi Zichen decided to lock her up for half a month. Xiao Shui, you should be very familiar with this place. Yi Zichen looked at the rows upon rows of buildings and the hawkers' shouts. He couldn't help but smile, then look at the snow rabbit Yao King. After staying in the God Realm for so long, and thanks to the Yao Ceiling Pagoda's existence, Yi Zichen more or less understood the geography of the God Realm and Yao Realm. The Snow Rabbit clan was one of the weaker clans in the Demon clan, and they lived close to the God clan. However, due to their docile temperament, their relationship with the Protoss was actually quite harmonious. Normally, when people of the God race went to trade, they would like to visit their Snow Rabbit race. This Snow Rabbit demon monarch was especially adorable. She looked like a pretty daughter from a humble family. Since her true form was that of a snow rabbit, her temperament was extremely docile. This was also why Yi Zichen had chosen her out of all the other heavenly Yao in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. It's alright. My tribe lives on the other side of the Netherworld River, but I've never been here before. I've only heard about it from my tribe members, so I'm not really familiar with it. Just like its appearance, the Snow Rabbit Demon King's voice was also soft and comforting to listen to. How long have you been in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda? Asked Yi Zichen. A long time, I guess. I'm one of the first Yao to enter the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. However, my talent is limited, so I'm still only a Yao King. But if I return to my clan, I'll be considered an expert. The Snow Rabbit smiled sweetly. Her smile seemed capable of melting anyone who saw it. You must be homesick, right? How about I let you go and let you return to your clan? Yi Zichen didn't even know why he'd said something like that. Perhaps her smile really had melted his heart. In any case, he suddenly had the urge to let her go. To his surprise, the Snow Rabbit shook her head with a smile, then clasped her hands behind her back and followed Yi Zichen. Even if I go back now, my relatives from that era might be long gone. Comparatively, I get along better with my companions in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. It's not just me, perhaps everyone else in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda feels the same way. We've all been in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda for tens of thousands of years. Although we're not family, we're closer than family. That's true. Yi Zichen didn't comment on that. Since the Snow Rabbit didn't want to leave, he wouldn't force her. He smiled and strolled along the city streets, enjoying its charm. At that moment, "Are you crazy? Can you stop following me?" Not far ahead of Yi Zichen was a girl in a white dress. She looked to be around 14 or 15 years old. Her hands were on her hips, her eyebrows were furrowed, and her hair was braided into dozens of braids. She looked especially shrewish. Her eyes widened as she looked at the young man in front of her. Behind the young man were a few attendants. "They're all Yao." The Snow Rabbit batted her eyes and laughed. Yi Zichen arched his brows. He sensed that the attendants were all immortal kings, and that the youth was an early-stage immortal king. "Mother, you and I are both divine beasts, and we're both canine divine beasts. My clan isn't weak in the Yao race, so why are you so dismissive of my love? Yao respect the strong. You're just a heavenly Yao, and I'm a Yao king. What right do you have to refuse me?" The youth tried his best to console her, but Yi Zichen understood. The youth was confessing his love to the girl, but the girl was dismissive. However, feelings were mutual. Why did it have to do with strength? Yi Zichen glanced at the snow rabbit, who explained softly, "That's actually how we Yao are. We respect the strong. If you like someone and you're stronger than them, you can just kidnap them." This custom was left behind by the Yao ancestor of the nine-tailed fox clan. However, because of this custom, the Yao ancestor fell for it and became the Five Elements' great emperor's wife. There's such a thing? Yi Zichen had heard of the story of the Five Elements' great emperor and the nine-tailed fox clan. However, he never would have guessed that the Yao had this sort of custom. If you like someone, you could just kidnap them, as long as they were stronger than you? Wow! What a domineering custom! However, at that moment the girl laughed disdainfully. She put her hands on her hips and curled her lip. "I don't like you. You're nothing but a high-grade divine beast. Do you know who I am? I'm a heaven-devouring dog, a primordial divine beast. Why don't you take a good look at yourself first? Never mind you, even if your father came to confess his love to me, I wouldn't agree to be your mother." Chapter 1135. Divine Beast Levels. As soon as the sinister youth finished speaking, his subordinates really did surround the shrewish girl. From the looks of it, they really were going to kidnap her on the street. The surrounding peddlers acted as if they were used to this. They calmly stowed away their stalls into their spatial rings, then retreated to a safe distance to watch the scene unfold. The pedestrians on the street did the same. Some took a detour, while others simply stopped to watch the commotion. However, not a single one of them looked like they wanted to help. "It's really just a robbery?" Yi Zichen, who'd never received this sort of education, paled in shock. He'd received an excellent education back in the modern realm. Not even the Yao of the Beast region he'd met in the Three Realms had this sort of open robbery. Now that he'd suddenly experienced this, he was a bit dumbfounded. Despite being surrounded by several Yao kings, the girl didn't panic at all. She glanced indifferently at the Yao kings, but her bright eyes betrayed a faint hint of excitement. At home, Dad's always watching over me, so the guards don't really dare attack me. I'll use you guys to test out my skills." As she spoke, the girl tilted her chin up and snorted, then beckoned the Yao kings over. "Come on." The Yao kings seemed to be frightened by the girl's indifference, and none of them dared to speak up. The youth, on the other hand, furrowed his brows darkly, then gnashed his teeth and shouted at his subordinates. "What are you all standing around for?" As the young man shouted angrily, all the Demon King-level experts charged at the girl. From their paces, it was clear that they were well-trained. When they attacked, they didn't take any unnecessary step. Instead, they attacked the girl in the most concentrated manner possible. When she saw the Yao King's attack, the girl unhurriedly stuck out her tongue. She tapped the ground with the tips of her feet, then spun through the Yao Kings like a spinning top. Although it looked very thrilling from the outside, in reality, no matter how the Monster Kings changed their moves, the young girl was always able to avoid them at the most critical moment. All the onlookers were dumbfounded. Some of them could sense that the girl was only a heaven immortal, but she was able to play with several demon kings in the palm of her hand. It was truly amazing. Those lesser demons are going to suffer. Snow Rabbit, who was also a spectator, covered her mouth and chuckled. These lesser demons are just ordinary demons. Although they are demon monarchs, how can their strength compare to the sky-immortal ancient divine beast, the heaven-devouring dog? Rather than letting them make a move, it would be better for that young man to make a move himself. There's something like that? Yi Zichen looked towards the snow rabbit. My lord, you may not know much about our demon race. Divine beasts are far superior to ordinary demon race in terms of talent and other aspects. Especially ancient divine beasts and super divine beasts, their talent is even more monstrous. To put it bluntly, ordinary Yao Kings are roughly the same as human immortal kings, but Yao Kings at the level of divine beasts can challenge human supreme level experts. The main reason why humans are the number one race is simply because they have more people. The snow rabbit's voice was soft and squishy, but it was this soft and squishy voice that said such rude words, which made people feel very strange when they heard it. However, Yi Zichen found it hard to believe. Humans do indeed have an advantage in terms of population, but if the Yao race is stronger than them in terms of peak strength, then the Yao race will still be the number one race, won't they? Based on what you're saying, if Yao Kings can beat human supremes, then diviners can beat human rulers, right? My lord, that's not quite right. When the snow rabbit heard that, she giggled. Humans who can become rulers are all saints. In truth, saints aren't that much different from Yao race's super divine beasts. That's why, in terms of peak strength, there's not much difference between humans and Yao. However, the human god emperor really is no match for our Yao race's eastern monarch, Tai Yao Emperor. Back in the day, only the five elements great emperor could stand up to him. As the snow rabbit and Yi Zichen debated, the girls' battle with the Yao Kings seemed to be coming to an end. Everything was as the snow rabbit had said. Those Demon King level experts did not gain any advantage against her. Instead, they suffered injuries of varying degrees. When the girl punched out again, the last Demon King who was fighting with her was also smashed to the ground. Only then did she giggle, clap her hands, and shrug at the youth. Hurry up and scram, or I'll beat you up as well. She waved her fists, then turned and left without so much as a backward glance. The onlookers instinctively made way for her, but the youth's expression changed. His body flashed, and he reappeared behind the girl, then slapped her on the shoulder. The girl had clearly anticipated this. She grabbed the youth's arm, turned around, and kicked him. Her kick tore through the air, snapping the ancient trees by the side of the road in half. As the onlookers sighed, the youth grabbed the girl's ankle with his left hand. Let go. After struggling a few times, she realized she couldn't escape his grasp. Her face contorted in fury and anxiety. She bit her lip and roared, "Impudent! Impudent! You dare to grab my leg? Do you want your clan to be exterminated?" The Yao race had a clear hierarchy. The girl was a member of the primordial heaven-devouring dog clan, so it wasn't unreasonable for her to say something like that to a youth who was only a high-grade divine beast. However, the young man merely smiled indifferently. His hand caressed the young girl's ankle without any scruples, and he even vaguely climbed up her calf. Let go. I'm a primordial heaven-devouring dog. The anxious girl kicked her other leg up, but it was pressed down by the young man's leg in midair. I know. You've already said it more than once. Exterminate your clan? So long as I take you back to my clan, what's left of you? What can your clan do to me? Won't we just have to obediently turn big problems into small ones and small ones into nothing? Peak-level clans like you care about face above all else, don't you? What's going on? Why can't I beat him? Yi Zichen arched his brows. That youth is a high-grade divine beast. Even among divine beasts, he's relatively strong. Although that girl is a primordial divine beast, her suppression over high-grade divine beasts is minimal. Add that to the fact that he's a Yao King, and her pressure is practically negligible. How pitiful. If I were a divine beast, I'd definitely help that girl. The snow rabbit hung her head dejectedly. Her true form was that of an ordinary Yao. Although she was a mid-stage Yao King, she was no match for that youth. Chapter 1136. An emissary of justice. When Yi Zichen saw the snow bunny's expectant gaze, he didn't dare look her in the eye. Attack? That didn't feel right. He'd just arrived and hadn't even gotten a clear grasp of Blue Sky City's situation. Now he wanted to interfere with Yao's affairs? Wasn't that a little too high profile? Little Snow. Yi Zichen laughed awkwardly. He'd already prepared an excuse to brainwash the soft-hearted snow bunny, but to his surprise, the girl sneered disdainfully. Have you thought it through? I'm the daughter of the Parliament of Stars' second pavilion head. You spoke rudely to me and took advantage of me. My father and mother, as well as my uncles, have definitely sensed it already. You should know about the Parliament of Stars, right? If I were you, I'd take my followers and scram right now. The young girl's eyes revealed a faint trace of coldness, causing the arrogance in her bones to become more obvious. When the onlookers heard about the Parliament of Stars, they were all astonished. In the past half-year, there had been two major factions in the limelight. One was upheaval, but their main territory was in the north. The other was the Parliament of Stars. Almost all of the southern Divine Mountains territory was under the Parliament of Stars' control. In the past half-year, they'd established an impregnable stronghold. If this girl was the daughter of the Parliament of Stars' second pavilion head, then, when the youth heard the words Parliament of Stars, his eyelids twitched. Although he was a Yao, he lived in Blue Sky City. How could he not know about the Parliament of Stars? From the way his arms trembled, he could sense his fear and unease. The girl snorted confidently. Hurry up and take your filthy hands off me. Do you want to die? In the face of her relentless threats, the youth's gaze flickered. Clearly, he was already wavering. However, there was a saying, when things reached an extreme, they would move in the opposite direction. The more pressure the girl exerted on the youth, the more despair he felt, the more he'd counterattack. The youth's gaze had already shifted from fear to sinister. As soon as the girl said she was the Parliament of Stars' second pavilion head's daughter, Yi Zichen knew he couldn't stay out of this. The Parliament of Stars. This was the perfect opportunity to infiltrate their ranks. You forced my hand. Just as the young girl was calm and composed, the young man's eyes became especially sinister. His right hand turned into a sharp claw and grabbed at the young girl's neck. That girl clearly did not expect such an outcome, and there was a faint trace of fear in her eyes. Swoosh! A streak of sword light pierced through the air. In the blink of an eye, a smear of blood appeared on the youth's arm as his entire arm fell to the ground. Ah! The one-armed young man clutched his bleeding arm and screamed. Yi Zichen, who was still in the middle of swinging his sword, put it away, and walked in between the young man and the girl. Tisk, audacious maniac, you actually dare to molest a young girl in broad daylight. The Snow Bunny's first reaction was to comfort the girl, but when she heard Yi Zichen's slightly comical tone, she froze. Sister, is he your friend? The girl was also shocked by Yi Zichen's funny tone. The Snow Bunny really wanted to tell her that she didn't know him. But, in the end, she bit her lips and nodded heavily. Ow. Alright. The girl grinned sheepishly. She didn't know what to say. Yi Zichen knew all of this, but he didn't care. He simply looked at the youth calmly. You. The one-armed young man looked up, his eyes bloodshot. Sensing his gaze, Yi Zichen pursed his lips and arched his brows. What did I do? Give it back to me. You've got guts, haven't you? It's broad daylight, and you dare molest a young girl? If you were in my territory, you'd be sentenced to at least 3 years in prison. How dare you glare at me? The youth didn't understand what Yi Zichen meant by 3 years. All he knew was that he'd lost an arm. Do you know who I am? I don't care who you are. As an emissary of justice, even if you're the Emperor of Heaven, I have to punish you. When he sensed Yi Zichen's aura, the youth swallowed his curses. He nodded solemnly, as if he wanted to carve Yi Zichen's face into his heart. Then he gnashed his teeth, rose to his feet, and laughed sinisterly. I'll remember you. Just you wait. I'll definitely make you regret this. After leaving behind these ruthless words, the young man left with his followers. However, before he'd taken more than a few steps, several beams of sword light suddenly appeared. He felt a chill run down his neck, and by the time he came to his senses, his head had been separated from his body. His subordinates were the same. Their heads were separated from their bodies, and they fell to the ground. The bystanders were dumbfounded. They barely saw how Yi Zichen had attacked. All they saw was a few flashes of light, and the Yao's heads were separated from their bodies. Yi Zichen looked over with fear in his eyes. At that moment, Yi Zichen put away his mischievous smile and looked coldly at the people lying in a pool of their own blood. I don't like to leave trouble for myself. Yi Zichen flicked the blood off the edge of his sword, then glanced at the Yao youth with cold arrogance, then at the onlookers. Did you hear what I said just now? I don't like to leave trouble for myself. Both the surrounding peddlers and bystanders recalled what Yi Zichen had just said. Now that he'd suddenly brought it up, didn't that mean? Your Excellency, we swear on our inner demons that we absolutely won't speak carelessly. The bystanders knelt one after another. Yi Zichen glanced at them, then suddenly turned around. Scram! Instantly, the bystanders fled in panic. In just a few breaths of time, the bustling street was empty except for Yi Zichen's group. The shops on either side of the street closed their windows and doors. It was unusually quiet. The girl stared in shock. A second ago, he'd been ridiculously comical, but in the next, he'd become a cold-blooded hero. However, before her eyes could fill with stars, she saw Yi Zichen. Hey, young miss. Are you all right? Both the girl and the snow bunny were speechless, especially the snow bunny. She really wanted to return to the Yao Ceiling Pagoda, even though she'd always wanted to leave. However, following a master like this was truly embarrassing. I'm fine. The girl stammered. When Yi Zichen heard that, he nodded in satisfaction. As long as you're fine, that's good. Hey, you see, I just saved you too. Can you please help me out a little? My lifelong dream is to join the Parliament of Stars and earn a living. Who needs you to save me? Even without you, I could handle it myself. Yi Zichen hadn't expected the girl to be so arrogant. She lifted her chin proudly and snorted. Chapter 1137. A Yao divine general. Never in his wildest dreams would he have imagined that he'd become related to the Parliament of Stars so easily. Moreover, she wasn't an ordinary member of the Parliament of Stars, but the precious daughter of the second Pavilion Master. Unbeknownst to them, in the depths of the Yao realm on the other side of the river Styx, there was a divine beast clan with hundreds of vassals. Ming-Er's nameplate shattered? Sitting in the main hall was an especially burly man. Even though he was sitting, it was obvious that he was at least 2 meters tall. "100 Assembly." As the burly man muttered, a black figure immediately appeared in the hall and cupped his hands. "Your subordinate is here. Go investigate." When Ming-Er left the clan to train, she went to the human race's blue sky city. Go investigate who Ming-Er's murderer is. But you also have to be careful. Although the relationship between the Yao and humans has eased a little in the past 10,000 years, the people of the Divine Mountains are still eyeing our Yao realm. Your subordinate understands. The man in the hall nodded. Just as he was about to leave, he heard the burly man speak again. Before leaving, Ming-Er brought a dozen or so Demon King-level followers with him. The opponent was able to kill Ming-Er and his followers at the same time without sending any news back to the clan. It's clear that the opponent's strength cannot be underestimated. You must be careful, understood? Yes. Like a gust of wind, the man in the hall disappeared. At the same time, the burly man glanced indifferently at the person who came to report the situation, then frowned at the woman next to him, who couldn't stop crying. What are you crying for? You only know how to cry all day long. He fiercely scolded the woman next to him. The sobbing woman immediately didn't dare to make another sound. She forcefully suppressed the grief in her heart and silently wiped away her tears. Ming-Er's death can only be attributed to his shallow cultivation. I've long since said that he couldn't leave the clan before he became a supreme, but you still spoiled him and secretly let him out. Are you happy now? The man in the hall shook his head and snorted. When he said that, the woman who'd managed to hold back her tears with great difficulty seemed to want to cry again. Stop crying. Can crying solve the problem? But Ming-Er, she. Only now did the woman speak. Looking at the woman's red eyes from crying and the sorrow on her face, the strong man's eyes also revealed a faint reluctance. He reached out his hand to touch the woman's hair and sighed, "That's enough, leave everything to me. I'll make a trip to the river Styx and see if I can redeem Ming-Er's life from Emperor Hades." "Find Emperor Ming?" Hearing this answer, the crying woman's eyes lit up, but they quickly dimmed. "I'm afraid it won't be easy to get someone from Emperor Hades. The nine-tailed great empress came looking for him a few years ago, but he refused to let her in. The East Royal Emperor wanted to ask him to release his disciple from the river Styx, but how would I know if I don't try? Besides, what I'm asking for is different from them." The woman in the hall fell silent. Back then, the nine-tailed heavenly fox empress and the Eastern monarch Tai had both asked for impossible things. One was to resurrect the five elements' great emperor, while the other was to resurrect the sovereign who held a grudge against the entire demon race. How could Emperor Hades possibly agree? But they were different. They only wanted to resurrect a demon king-level descendant. As long as they showed absolute sincerity, Emperor Hades might even agree to their request out of respect for her husband's status as a Yao divine general. "Wait here. I'll go to the river Styx and have a chat with Emperor Hades." As soon as he finished speaking, the man in the hall stood up from his chair. The instant he stood up, a set of blue robes embroidered with beautiful mountains and rivers appeared beside him. "Husband, wait. I'll go with you." Suddenly, the woman put away her tearful face, and her aura rose a few notches in that instant. "If two Yao divine generals pay a personal visit, perhaps our chances of success will be higher." The burly man couldn't help but freeze. Perhaps he'd almost forgotten that his wife had taken care of him and raised their children after they married. But before they even got married, she was one of the 99 Yao divine generals of the earthly fiends. She'd risen to fame even earlier than he had single-handedly exterminated an entire tribe of divine beasts, the violet gold Rakshasa. Yi Zichen naturally had no idea that the little Yao king he'd casually killed had such a background. Right now, he was still basking in the joy of entering the Parliament of Stars. But it had to be said that the girl he'd saved was absolutely a tsundere. He was clearly the young girl's savior, but because he said he wanted to enter the Parliament of Stars, the young girl really became his subordinate and was ordered around. The Snow Rabbit and him followed the young girl's attendant and strolled around Blue Sky City for half a day. Wait, it wasn't just him and the Snow Bunny. She and the girl were on extremely good terms. The two of them even called each other sisters. He was probably the only one who'd become her subordinate. Now that he thought about it, it was laughable. On one hand, he was the villain who'd saved her life, and on the other, he belonged to her. But despite his status, he'd been reduced to a mere follower. Just as Yi Zichen was about to collapse, a figure flitted across the sky above Blue Sky City. He wore a white robe and was of medium build. His long, black hair was streaked with a few strands of white. Not long after he landed in front of the girl, hundreds of people appeared in the sky above Blue Sky City. These people were all wearing azure robes with star patterns imprinted on them. What was even more shocking was that these people were actually all Celestial King Realm experts. "Little sis, are you all right?" The man who'd first appeared hurriedly ran over to the girl and looked her up and down. The girl looked at him speechlessly and curled her lips. "You guys sure got here fast. Fortunately, I'm blessed with good fortune. Otherwise, I would have been kidnapped and taken to the Yao race as a wife by now." The girl rolled her eyes. The man in front of her laughed. "Who's so bold as to kidnap my little sister and make her his wife? Who's so bold as to kidnap my little sister and make her his wife? Don't let me catch you, or I'll cut off one of your dog legs." "Forget it. You won't be able to cut off a dog leg, but you can take a dog head. But forget it. In any case, I'm fine." She rolled her eyes at the man. In response, the man narrowed his eyes but said nothing. Instead, his gaze fell on Yi Zichen and the Snow Bunny. You two must have helped my little sister out of her predicament. Our Parliament of Stars will forever remember this kindness." With that, he bowed deeply to Yi Zichen and the Snow Bunny. When he saw this, Yi Zichen couldn't help but nod in satisfaction. This was the attitude one should have toward their saviors. To his surprise, before he could say anything, the girl refused. "What kind of nonsense are you remembering? Even without him, I could have gotten out of trouble all the same." The girl snorted proudly, then glanced coolly at Yi Zichen. Chapter 1138. Little White Follower. Follower? When Yi Zichen heard this, his expression froze. He was the Grand Leader of Upheaval, the famous Grandmaster Yi of Ice Blue City. How could he be his follower? What a joke. He'd never been anyone's follower in his entire life. Right now, he just wanted to break into the Parliament of Stars. He had no choice but to lower his status and follow this girl's nonsense. She wanted him to be her follower? The Snow Bunny noticed Yi Zichen's change in expression. Although she didn't particularly understand her master's personality, he was still the master of the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. Just as she was about to speak up for him. "All right, it's settled." Just a moment ago, Yi Zichen's expression had been one of irritation, but now, in the blink of an eye, he looked completely willing. His lips curved into a 45-degree smile, and he nodded at the girl with the kindest, most satisfied smile. "It'd be great to be your follower. My status is definitely much higher than the average members, isn't it? But of course. How could the average member compare to my follower?" The girl stuck her chin up proudly, clung to the Snow Bunny's arm, and strode forward with her head held high. The Snow Rabbit, who was being dragged away by the girl, glanced towards Yi Zichen. Yi Zichen also nodded towards her subtly, causing her to turn around and follow the girl. Hundreds of immortal kings had appeared. It was a majestic sight. Yi Zichen was at the back of the group, but at that moment, someone suddenly appeared beside him. It was none other than the man who'd come to his rescue, the man the girl had complained about. "I am Bai Qiji. May I know your name?" "Yi Chen." Yi Zichen's name resounded throughout the lower lands. Even in Blue Sky City of the Southern Divine Mountain, there was no way they wouldn't know his name. He didn't want to reveal his identity, so he intentionally erased the middle character of his name. "So it's Brother Yi. But you sound a bit like the recently famous Grandmaster Yi." "That Grandmaster Ye's name is Yi Zichen, and Brother Ye's name is Yi Chen. You're only one character apart. If only Brother Yi were that Grandmaster Yi." Unfortunately, Yi Zichen didn't know if the other party was just testing him, but since he'd decided to keep up the act, he naturally couldn't let the cat out of the bag. He was a quality actor. When it came to acting, he was definitely one of the best. "What kind of existence is Grandmaster Yi?" "I also want to be Grandmaster Yi, but unfortunately," Bai Qiji's eyes roamed as he laughed heartily. "Haha, Brother Yi, there's no need to belittle yourself. Brother Ye's strength is most likely at the peak of the Immortal King stage. This kind of strength is already at the peak of the Lower God Mountain. By the way, I hope Brother Yi won't take offense. My little sister is indeed a little naughty and mischievous. I hope that you, a peak-stage Immortal King expert, won't take her words seriously." "Are you joking?" "I took it seriously." Yi Zichen immediately put on a shocked expression and looked at Bai Qiji. "Ai Bai. You're young lady's older brother, so I'll call you young Master Bai." "You flatter me, you flatter me." Of course. You're both the second pavilion head's children, so from now on, you'll all be under my command. You have to call me young Master Bai." Yi Zichen didn't give him time to argue. "I'm telling you, young Master Bai, your young lady really knows how to cause trouble. Although I haven't known her for long, I can tell that she's definitely a troublemaker." "That, more or less." Bai Qiji nodded. "See, then she needs an extremely strong person to stay by her side and smooth things over for her." Yi Zichen instantly stood up straight and patted his chest with his right hand. "I can do it." Baichiji narrowed his eyes and looked Yi Zichen up and down. His eyes glinted faintly. Having Brother Yi take care of my little sister is naturally great. After expressing his affirmation, his gaze revealed a threatening aura. But if Brother Yi wants to take advantage of this opportunity to get close to my little sister or the Parliament of Stars, I think Brother Yi should stop as soon as possible. In the face of this threat, Yi Zichen's smile faded somewhat. Young Master Bai, I don't quite understand what you're saying. It doesn't matter whether you understand or not. When we get home, Father will decide for himself. I'm just here to warn you. Once we get home, I'm afraid it'll be too late for Brother Yi to stop. I'm your little sister's benefactor, laughed Yi Zichen. I'll naturally remember that. I'll definitely repay you in the future. But don't say I didn't warn you, Brother Yi. I don't want anyone to hurt my little sister, no matter the reason or method. If I find out, I won't let them off the hook. Baichiji cupped his hands in greeting, then hurried to the girl's side. Yi Zichen stayed behind. He couldn't help but smile faintly. As he recalled Baichiji's threatening tone, the corners of his lips curled into a smile. Less than an hour later, Yi Zichen followed the group to a residence. There were 2 stone statues in front of the main gate. The gates were a fiery red, and a plaque hung above the entrance. The Bai residence. When they entered, the courtyard was like a painting of mountains and rivers. It was extremely pleasing to the eye. Baichiji dismissed the hundreds of immortal kings. At the same time, a beautiful woman walked out of a room. Mother! When she saw the woman, the girl giggled and ran over to her. Baichiji walked up to her and cupped his hands. Mother! The woman lovingly tousled the girl's hair. However, at that moment, Yi Zichen sensed a powerful immortal awareness probe the area. Before long, the woman frowned and turned to the girl. Bai Ling, did you get into trouble again? Did you ask your brother for help? Of course not. The girl pouted, her eyes darting around. She avoided the woman's question and laughed. It's my father. I need to talk to him about something. Little Bai Ling, did you only remember your father after getting into trouble? At this moment, a hearty laughter rang out from the room. Not long after, a young man wearing a white robe walked out from the room. As soon as he left the room, Yi Zichen was dumbfounded. The man's gaze fell on the girl. He smiled dotingly, then said, "Why are you looking for me? What business do you have with your father?" "Dad, someone wants to join our Parliament of Stars. The way I see it, he seems pretty strong. I want him to be my attendant. What do you think? That's him. Take a look." To think my precious daughter would personally speak up for him. I'd like to see him. As he spoke, the man looked in the direction of the girl's finger. Instantly, his hand slid off her head, and he froze in place, as if petrified. Little Bai, not bad. You're already a father. Chapter 1139. The Bai family. When everyone in the courtyard heard Yi Zichen's words, they froze. The girl who'd brought him here, as well as Baichiji and the beautiful woman, all looked at the white-robed man. His furrowed brows relaxed, and his eyes glistened with tears. It was as if someone had knocked over a bottle of complex flavors. His nose was bright red, and he wanted to cry, but at the same time, he wanted to laugh. In the end, he grimaced, lowered his head, and covered his face with his right hand. His shoulders trembled violently. "Dad, he's crying?" The young girl at the side looked at this scene in astonishment. In her memory, her father was an indomitable hero. He had the tenderness only mothers and children had, but he was also cold and merciless in the face of enemies. She'd seen her father in all sorts of ways, but she'd never seen him cry. Yi Zichen chuckled, walked up to the man, and patted him on the shoulder. In fact, one could also see a faint crystal in his eyes, but his condition was much better. He pursed his lips and said with a smile. He pressed his lips into a smile and said, "You're a father now. It's not good to cry in front of your child. You're no longer that Sundra little white boss. When the man heard this, he could no longer contain his emotions. He reached out and hugged Yizichin. The bitterness in his heart overflowed like a broken dam, and hot tears overflowed from his eyes. This was none other than Little White, the poodle Yizichin had gotten from the heavenly court in the modern realm. He'd been the young master of the sky-devouring dog clan back in the Three Realms. When he saw that it was him, Yizichin was astonished. Memories surfaced involuntarily in his mind. It was as if everything had happened just yesterday, but when he looked back, it was already 100 years ago. Little White had ascended from the beast region to the god realm. He'd grown from a naive youth into a father. Time really did fly by. Boss, I knew you wouldn't die. An hour later, Little White calmed his emotions and sat down with Yizichin at the stone table in the courtyard. I guess I was lucky. I should have died when I was sealing chi, however. Someone separated my soul and made me reincarnate again. Actually, my soul is still missing a part. When Guzichin rescued Yizichin, his 3 spiritual and 6 physical souls had already begun fusing with Denglong. It wasn't quite possible for him to completely strip off his soul, so he left one of his 6 physical forms behind. He had never told anyone about this, but he didn't need to hide anything from Little White. 3 spiritual souls and 6 physical souls. Lacking 1 physical soul would directly affect his comprehension of the Tao techniques of heaven and earth. Recently, when he was comprehending the 5 elemental arts, he could feel that as his comprehension of the 5 elemental arts deepened, the drawback of losing a soul became more and more obvious. Yizichin was practically certain that if he didn't retrieve his soul, it would be very difficult for him to perfect his Tao of the 5 elements and condense a Tao heart. He actually lost a soul? Hearing this news, Xiao Bai knitted his brows. He was no longer the ignorant Xiao Bai from before. Right now, he was also an expert that was about to step into the Earth sovereign realm, so he was clear about the influence of the soul on the comprehension of the heavens and earth. Then what are you going to do with it? What else can I do? When the opportunity arises, I'll just go down and retrieve my soul. Yizichin smiled relaxedly, then changed the subject. What's the point of saying all that? How about we talk about you instead? You're not bad, kid. I haven't seen you for so long, but you've already gotten married and have kids. Aren't you going to introduce me to my sister-in-law and those 2 kids? When Little White heard that, he immediately blushed and grabbed the woman's hand. This is Bai Qiao. She's also a heaven-devouring dog. I got to know her after you sealed Denglong. The beautiful woman also smiled and said, Big brother Yi. Little White smiled and nodded, then his gaze landed on the girl and Bai Qiji. This time, however, he wasn't as bashful as before. Instead, he glared at them and shouted, Come here. You too, come here. The proud girl and Bai Qiji, who'd threatened Yizichin in the past, lowered their heads and walked over. Just now, the 2 siblings had been wondering what to do. Yizichin clearly had a close relationship with their father, but it seemed they hadn't treated him kindly on the way here. This is Bai Qiji, my eldest son. Qiji, call him uncle. Bai Qiji cupped his hands in greeting. Uncle. With that, he hurriedly took a step back and bowed deeply. Uncle, please don't take offense to the things your nephew said to you on the way here. What did he say? Little White tilted his head and frowned. Bai Qiji said nothing. Yizichin laughed and shook his head. It's nothing. Hurry up and introduce me to this girl. In truth, I want to get to know her more. When the girl heard Yizichin mention her, her face contorted into a bitter melon. She stood to the side, scowling miserably as she fidgeted with the hem of her clothes. What are you doing? I didn't know you knew my dad. You're my elder. You can't be so petty, can you? How can you speak to your uncle like that? Yizichin scolded the girl viciously. When she saw Little White's angry expression, she hurriedly shrunk back and pouted. This is my youngest daughter, Bai Bailing. Perhaps I've spoiled her too much, so she. Big bro, did she offend you somehow? She even said she wanted you to be her bodyguard. That damned girl. She has no respect for her elders. Little White rebuked her angrily. Bai Bailing pursed her lips and lowered her head. She repeatedly drew circles on the stone table. Yi Zichen, however, generously waved his hand and smiled. It's fine. She's just a kid. Bailing's not bad. She's full of energy. It's just that her mouth is truly poisonous. Girls should be gentler. With that, Yi Zichen's spatial ring lit up. Before long, a pile of divine weapons, pills, and talismans appeared on the stone table. There were so many that the entire table wasn't even able to fit them all. The extras hung in the air. It's our first time meeting, so as your big brother and uncle, I can't be stingy. Consider these little trinkets a greeting gift for you and your children. The dazzling array of treasures dazzled Little White and the others. Even Bai Bailing's eyes widened as she reached out. Demigod artifacts! Sky Immortal pills! 9th grade defensive talismans! Bai Bailing's exclamations hadn't stopped for a moment. She looked through all the treasures, but to her surprise, she didn't find anything below the 7th grade. Bai Bailing's childish face was filled with shock. Then, she heard Bai Bailing speak. Then she heard Bai Bailing say, "Uncle, what exactly do you do?" Her father was the second pavilion head of the Parliament of Stars. His family was well off, but her family didn't have any demigod artifacts. As for those defensive talismans, they had 10th and 11th grade ones. Chapter 1140. Chapter 1140. 100-year upheaval, huh? Bai Bailing, who'd been happily fiddling with her demigod artifact, dropped it. She stared blankly at her uncle, who was smiling at her, and then looked at her father's face a few times. Upheaval. Bai Qiji and Bai Qiao froze, but Little White was the only one who laughed after a brief pause. As expected of boss. Wei Jie and the others are the ones you pushed into the light, right? That's right. I don't have the time or energy to take care of things like this. Wei Jie and the others are my trusted aides I met when I first arrived in the lower lands. I'm at ease leaving it to them. Yi Zichen nodded noncommittally, then turned to Little White. How did your Parliament of Stars get established? Wei Jie told me that you're a new faction. In just half a year, you've taken control of over 30% of the lower lands factions. Isn't that all thanks to Yin Shang? Little White sighed inexplicably. Big brother, you might not know this, but just half a year ago, Yin Shang became a diviner. He became a diviner. Yi Zichen was stunned. Earth Supreme, Sky Supreme, Diviner, Ruler. Back in the lower 3 realms, Yin Shang had only been an Earth Supreme, but now, just as Yi Zichen was astonished by Yin Shang's breakthroughs, he remembered that he'd been reincarnated for over 100 years. He was the Emperor Star's Minister of the Left, after all. It wasn't impossible that he'd become a diviner. That's right. He became a diviner half a year ago. Anyone who can become a diviner is an overlord of the lower lands and can establish their own faction. In truth, none of us believed you were dead, so Yin Shang used the Parliament of Stars as a name. In truth, he founded this faction for you. To tell the truth, aside from Zuomo, he's the one who believes you're still alive the most. Xiao Bai shrugged his shoulders and a smile appeared in his eyes. He told me that you were the Emperor Star, the future ruler of heaven and earth. You're bound to find it difficult to advance in the God realm, and this faction is building a foundation for you. Once you return, it'll be your sharpest sword. I never would have guessed that you'd join Upheaval. We almost fought. Yin Shang. Yi Zichen inexplicably recalled countless memories of him. Back in the modern realm, he'd forcibly abducted a Yin family clansman's soul and deliberately approached him. When he was in the lower 3 realms, he had assisted him many times, and became the Emperor Star's auxiliary star. I have really made a lot of friends that I can trust. Boss, since you're here, why don't we transfer the Parliament of Stars to you? That way, if the Parliament of Stars and Upheaval join forces, the entire lower lands will belong to us, said Little White. No. If Yi Zichen had come to investigate the Parliament of Stars' internal affairs, then weaken and swallow them up, the Parliament of Stars wouldn't have been able to deal with him. However, now that he knew that the Parliament of Stars was established by his own people, he had to change his plans. The Parliament of Stars will still be under your control, and I will only tell Wei Jie and the others about the true relationship between our two sides. Beneath the surface, we will still be competitors. What's this for? Xiaobai was puzzled. Do you think the lower lands won't affect the interests of the Divine Mountains? If the lower Divine Mountains were to really monopolize the lower Divine Mountains, the upper Divine Mountains would probably send out forces to suppress them. Right now, we're keeping each other in check. That way, the upper Divine Mountains can rest easy. After a while, you can suppress 10% of the remaining 20%, and I'll have Wei Jie and the others suppress the remaining 10. That way, we'll have a 50-60 split. The lower Divine Mountains might even contact you to suppress upheaval. That way, we'll be able to better interact with the people of the lower Divine Mountains and learn more. But in truth, we already have the entire lower lands in our hand. Yi Zichen had only come up with all of this after learning who the Parliament of Stars belonged to. Little White was no fool. When he heard Yi Zichen's explanation, he quickly understood his true intentions. Yi Zichen gave him a thumbs up, smiled, and said, "You're only the second pavilion head of the Parliament of Stars. You are only the second pavilion master of the Parliament of Stars. Could the great pavilion master be Yinshang? No, he's just like you, working behind the scenes. The head of the Parliament of Stars is actually..." Before Xiaobai could finish speaking, two figures had already appeared in his courtyard. One of them had a hogue on his head, and was holding a wooden stick in his hand. The other person was a woman. She looked so young and beautiful that she could cause the downfall of a city, but her mouth had not been idle from beginning to end. "O.L. White, why did you bring us here in such a hurry?" said the Ahogue. As soon as he spoke, he saw the woman's nose twitch uncontrollably. Her gaze landed squarely on Yi Zichen. "Wha? You?" The Ahogue followed the girl's gaze and looked over. In an instant, the stick in his hand fell from his hand. "Boss. Yu Zhan, long time no see. Lil Lori, it looks like you've grown up." Yi Zichen couldn't help but chuckle when he saw the two familiar faces. "That's right, I've grown up." Lori carefully put the pills away. Although 100 years had passed, her obsession with pills hadn't diminished in the slightest. She clenched her fists, then glanced at Yi Zichen. A faint smile tugged at her lips. "When I first took human form, you really screwed me over. You used first-grade pills to fool me every day. You made me your attendant and babysit your child. I was wondering how you could bear to trick a beautiful, naive girl like me. 100 years was indeed enough time for a person to grow up." Lori was no longer the blank slate she'd been when she first entered the world. She had her own experiences, and her personality had gradually matured into that of a fully human person. Yi Zichen couldn't help but shake his head and laugh when he saw her put her hands on her hip. He didn't explain. He simply took a dozen or so bottles of 6th-grade pills from his spatial ring and tossed them to her. "For you." She took the pills, opened the corks, and smelled their medicinal fragrance. Lori's expression immediately improved. "Since you gave me such high-grade pills, I won't bicker with you." With that, she hurriedly popped one into her mouth, her expression one of intoxication. With Go Yuzhan and Lori's help, Yi Zichen gained a general understanding of the Parliament of Stars structure. Practically everyone who ascended from the lower realms joined the Parliament of Stars, regardless of whether they were Yao or humans. Go Yuzhan took on the role of pavilion head of the Parliament of Stars. In Yin Shang's words, he was the minister of the right after all. He had to find a job. Furthermore, he really was the strongest expert in the Parliament of Stars. Even Little White, the primordial divine beast heaven-devouring dog, could only fight him evenly in its true form. Lori was now the third pavilion head of the Parliament of Stars. After 100 years of experience, she was no longer as naive as before. As a medicine king, her strength was second only to Go Yuuzhan and Little White. However, Chapter 1141. Chapter 1141. Disapproving a high-grade divine beast? Unlike Yi Zichen expected, when everyone in the courtyard heard that he'd killed a high-grade divine beast clansman, they didn't seem concerned at all. Only Little White frowned. What clan is it? The stupid dog clan. At that moment, Bai Bailing rushed over from who knew where. Bai Qiji was by her side. They each carried a tray of immortal fruit and wine, then placed it on the stone table. However, before the people on the table could eat, she directly grabbed the fruit on the plate and took a bite. Impudent! Little White glared at Bai Bailing, then turned to Bai Qiji. What exactly is going on? By the time Bai Qiji arrived, everything was already over. All he could do was shrug, feigning ignorance. Little White had no choice but to frown at Bai Bailing helplessly. Why did I give birth to a troublemaker like you? What exactly happened? Dad, you've wrongly accused me this time. Bai Bailing took a bite of the fruit and pouted, then snorted indignantly. He's a sand dog clansman. I ran into him on the 9th floor of the sky-reaching tower. He kept yelling about wanting me to be his wife, and told his subordinates to capture me. He said something about cooking the rice. When Uncle Yi saw him, he helped me kill him. That's the gist of it. If you don't believe me, ask Uncle Yi. When he saw Bai Bailing's pitiful expression, Yi Zichen couldn't help but nod. Lil Ling right. That's exactly what happened. That person called himself a high-grade divine beast, and wanted to kidnap Lil Ling so I killed him along the way. That dog clansman should be from the same clan as you, right? Killing him won't bring you any trouble, will it? If it were Yi Zichen, he naturally wouldn't care about the sand dog clansman. Otherwise, he wouldn't have killed him on the spot. Part of the reason he'd helped was to divert the sand dog clansman's attention to the Parliament of Stars. But now that the Parliament of Stars was on his side, he couldn't hide it any longer. What trouble could there possibly be? Good job. Before Little White could say anything, Go Yuuzhan was already grinning from the side. Boss is indeed the boss. You've just arrived at Azure Sky City, and you've already destroyed the entire Silly Dog clan. You have some skills. Yi Zichen was a bit confused when he heard Go Yuuzhan's casual words. Why did it sound like killing the sand dogs was the right thing to do? By the way, boss, when you killed that kid, did he turn into a pile of sand or was he completely destroyed? Destroy both your body and soul. Yi Zichen didn't have much confidence in his own words. When he thought back to when he left, the young man didn't even leave behind a speck of dust, nor did he turn into sand like Go Yuuzhan said. Go Yuuzhan immediately clapped his hands in approval. That's great. If we don't destroy those stupid dogs, they won't die. If you turn him into sand, it won't take long for him to recover. Yi Zichen felt like his brain wasn't enough. He subconsciously looked at the snow rabbit, wanting to ask her about the conflict between the races in the demon realm. However, she could only look at him helplessly. She'd already left the Yao realm for tens of thousands of years. She really didn't know what was at stake here. Little White, on the other hand, noticed Yi Zichen's confusion and explained. The Sand Dog clan and the Sky Devouring Dog clan have always been enemies. Even though the Sky Devouring Dog clan has always occupied the position of the clan leader, they have always been eyeing our clan's position. Our two clans have assassinated each other's clansmen quite often. I stayed here because my clan sent me to keep an eye on the Sand Dog's movements. Something like that actually happened? He'd been preparing to divert the blame, but it had fallen right into their trap? I don't know much about the conflict between you Yao, but I killed him so brazenly in the city. Quite a few people saw. Won't the Sand Dogs come looking for trouble? Then let them come. I've long since been annoyed by those bastards. Goyujan slapped the table and snorted. From his expression, it was clear that while Yi Zichen hadn't been around, they'd formed quite a grudge with the sand dogs. Boss, you've only been here for a short time. Even if I tried to explain things to you, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to. All I can say is that although the upper three realms seem like a pool of stagnant water, it's actually turbulent beneath the surface. The gods, Yao, and demons are in cahoots with each other, but they're also wary of each other. Right now, countless factions have formed secret alliances. Although Little White didn't explain things particularly clearly, Yi Zichen could tell that the current situation wasn't as simple as he'd thought. Of course, he didn't want to know too much about it. He didn't know because his level wasn't high enough. When he really reached that level, he would naturally understand this information. Then if they really send a celestial being expert here, how are you going to resist? Yi Zichen frowned. Even if he didn't understand the Yao situation, this was a clan of high-grade divine beasts. They'd definitely be able to find diviner-level Yao. Although diviners weren't particularly high in the three realms, in the lower realms, they could destroy heaven and earth. Diviners? Little White laughed disdainfully. I'm actually hoping they'll send diviners, but they won't dare. Little White stretched lazily, stood up, and said, Don't just sit there. Don't just sit here. In a while, I'll contact my boss's old acquaintances from the mortal world. Let's have a good gathering. Tonight, let's not go home until we're drunk. Alright. Goyujan agreed heartily. You guys go ahead and drink. Just give me some pills, said Lori, pursing her lips. Diviners wouldn't dare come. This filled Yi Zichen with suspicion. However, judging from Little White's confident expression, he clearly knew what was going on. In that case, there was no need for him to worry. Yi Zichen tossed the sand dogs to the back of his mind, then hooked his arms around Little White and Goyujan's neck. All right, let's drink until we're drunk. At the same time, 3,000 meters below the end of the river Styx, two purple demonic lights suddenly appeared with countless bizarre fishes swimming around. Furthermore, those fishes weren't weak, even the weakest one was at the Earth's sovereign realm. It was so much so that one could even vaguely sense the aura of a celestial realm being. The two beams of purple light were none other than the parents of the youth Yi Zichen had killed. When they appeared, the fish glinted menacingly, but when they sensed their auras, they obediently retreated far away, not daring to provoke them. After chasing the fish away, they turned their attention to the Black Palace in front of them. Chapter 1142. Emperor Hades' Palace. This is Emperor Hades' Palace? Asked the woman who'd once been a purple-gold Rakshasa. Although she'd lived for a very long time and was a divine general of the Yao race, this was her first time visiting Emperor Hades' palace. Yes. With her husband's confirmation, she frowned and looked at the palace. It felt very ordinary to her. The way she saw it, since it was Emperor Hades' palace, it naturally had to be very imposing. But just from the outside, it didn't seem as grand as the residence of a subsidiary tribe's patriarch. It was then that she noticed two pitch-black gems on the palace walls. The burly man noticed her gaze and immediately tried to stop her. Pfft! But it was too late. By the time he made his move, the woman had already spat out a mouthful of blood, staining the faint black waters of the river Styx red. She took several steps back, her face pale, her entire body trembling as if she were suffering from malaria. It was hard to imagine that she, a divine general of the Yao race and a half-step ruler, would be so weak. But when she glanced at the black gems, she coughed up a mouthful of blood and hurriedly retreated. Dire! The burly man's heart sank when he saw the woman's pale face. Just as he was about to take a closer look, he saw countless sea beasts converging on them. They'd all been attracted by the scent of blood. There were tens of thousands of them, and even the weakest of them was at least a ninth-stage Earth Supreme. The burly man constantly unleashed his aura, intimidating the sea beasts into not daring to attack. At the same time, he roared at the palace. Yao Divine General Sha Pengkuan requests an audience with His Majesty, Emperor Hades. Yao Divine General Sha Pengkuan requests an audience with His Majesty, Emperor Hades. Yao Divine General Sha Pengkuan requests an audience with His Majesty, Emperor Hades. There were 3 hurried shouts, and the burly man channeled the power of the Yao gods into them. The surrounding sea beasts were already growing restless. They'd already gathered enough sea beasts to attack Sha Pengkuan and his wife. Yao. Sha Pengkuan's expression grew more and more agitated as the sea beasts grew more and more ferocious. Just as he was about to open his mouth to pay his respects again, the palace doors rumbled open. The sea beasts that had gathered around Sha Pengkuan and his wife immediately dispersed when the doors to the residence opened. A young man walked out of the residence and cupped his hands towards them. "Master has been waiting for a long time. Please come in and have a chat." After 10 minutes, the young man brought Sha Pengkuan to a large hall. "Master, the 2 dire monster generals have arrived." The young man bowed towards the highest point in the hall. Sha Pengkuan and his wife felt an aura that made their hearts tremble. "Master of the Nether River, Emperor Hades." "Sha Kuan Pring greets your Majesty, Emperor Hades." "Yu Dai greets your Majesty, Emperor Hades." Both of them prostrated themselves on the ground, burying their heads deep into the ground, not daring to look at the man sitting on the throne. The man sitting on the high seat was also surrounded by a faint mist, and outsiders couldn't see his appearance at all. "Yes." An indifferent reply came from every corner of the hall. Before long, Sha Pengkuan and his wife felt a wave of energy surround them, lifting them off the ground. At the same time, Yu Dai felt a wave of energy enter her body, instantly healing her wounds. "Many thanks, Your Majesty Emperor Hades." The Hades Emperor bowed deeply towards the Hades Emperor. The violet gold Rakshasa dire monster general must have seen the black demon dragon's eyes outside. The black demon dragon's eyes. Sha Pengkuan and Yu Dai instantly froze. They suddenly remembered. The only creature worthy of being called a black demon dragon was the one who had thrown the Yao and God realms into chaos. The primordial black demon dragon. Back then, he'd been the dragon race's most likely successor to the dragon god position. However, something had happened to him, and he'd demonized and joined the demons. With his addition, the demons were like a tiger that had grown wings. They wantonly attacked the God realm and the Yao realm, and even the Nether River couldn't rest in peace. Emperor Hades was furious, so he personally suppressed the black demon dragon, took its eyes and placed them on his palace. He returned the dragon's bones, tendons, and other items to the dragons. In order to atone for his crimes, the dragons used his tendons, bones, and skin to forge 3 great divine artifacts. The number 1 divine artifact, the Xianyuan sword, was one of them. Fortunately, Yu Dai wasn't weak. If she'd been just a little weaker, the fiendish energy emanating from the black demon dragon's eyes would have caused her body to explode and die. "There's no need to thank me. It was nothing more than a slight effort." Emperor Hades's tone was as indifferent as ever, then he turned to the youth in the hall. "Go and bring Prince Sha here." The youth left to carry out his orders. Sha Pengkuan and Yu Dai were even more grateful. "Thank you, Emperor Hades." They'd come here for their son, but they hadn't expected Emperor Hades to have predicted this all along. He didn't even need them to say anything. No. Since when was Emperor Hades so easy to talk to? Sha Pengkuan immediately realized that something was wrong. He couldn't help but frown. "Emperor Hades, Divine General Yu, Divine General Sha, didn't you come here for your son? What's wrong? Did I make a mistake?" An indifferent reply reverberated through the hall. Sha Pengkuan sensed something was wrong with his tone and immediately bowed. "Your Majesty Emperor Hades, there's no mistake. In that case, Divine General Sha, what need is there for that expression?" It was impossible to tell whether Emperor Hades was happy or angry. Sha Pengkuan revealed a pained expression. At that moment, the youth returned with the youth Yi Zichen had just killed. However, the youth was only a soul. His eyes were tightly shut, and he had no consciousness whatsoever. Yudai immediately recognized the soul as her son. Her voice was filled with grief. She almost ran over, but Shoppenkuan held her back. Furthermore, as soon as the soul entered the hall, it flew straight towards Emperor Hades. Shoppenkuan and Yu Dai watched nervously as Shoppenkuan's soul landed in Emperor Hades's hands. Before long, the soul flew back towards them. They anxiously shielded the soul, then Emperor Hades spoke again. I've already sealed your son's 3 spiritual and 6 physical souls. All you have to do is reconstruct his body, and he can be reborn. Your Majesty Emperor Hades, I, Shoppenkuan, will never forget your benevolence. He knelt on one knee. When Yudai saw Shoppenkuan kneel, she knelt as well. I will definitely repay this kindness. Of course you will. Emperor Hades didn't comment on his reply. He snorted. You should know that the value of my resurrection isn't small. Today I've brought your son back to life. You owe me a huge favor. But of course. Shoppenkuan smiled wryly. So long as your Majesty Emperor Hades asks, I'll do everything in my power to accomplish it. Who would have thought that Emperor Hades would fall silent at his words? After a long while, he finally spoke again. Chapter 1143. Chapter 1143. Revealing the Emperor's plot. Suddenly, a cloud of mist descended from the top of the palace. When the cloud descended in front of Sha Kuanping and Yu Dai, sweat uncontrollably poured down like rain, and all the pores on their bodies fiercely contracted. A sense of danger. It had been tens of thousands of years since they'd had such a feeling. In the Yao realm, they were lofty Yao divine generals. But in front of Emperor Hades, they were nothing more than lowly ants. If Emperor Hades wanted to kill them now, they'd have to fight to the death, and they wouldn't even have a 10% chance of surviving. May I ask what Your Excellency Emperor Hades wants us to do? Kneeling on one knee, Shoppenkuan's eyes flickered incessantly. He'd known that reviving his son from Emperor Hades would require a price, but he was more nervous about what exactly Emperor Hades wanted him to do. From the moment he'd arrived at Emperor Hades' palace, his disciple had personally led the way and brought his son here without them even asking. From what he could tell, this series of actions meant that the two of them were slowly falling into Emperor Hades' trap. Especially now that Emperor Hades had landed right in front of them. Shoppenkuan didn't understand. What on earth did Emperor Hades want? You. This time, Emperor Hades's voice didn't come from every direction of the palace. Instead, it came directly from the mist and entered Shoppenkuan's ears. Actually, I haven't made up my mind yet. Then Your Excellency. Shoppenkuan was even more confused. If he hadn't made up his mind, why had he landed right in front of them? Could it be that Emperor Hades knew that the Yao wanted to deal with him, so he'd landed right next to the two of them to send a warning? If that was the case, things were going to get troublesome. In the past 100 years, the Yao had split into 2 factions, the pro-war faction and the pro-peace faction. Shoppenkuan and the others belonged to the pro-war faction. The pro-war faction's main goal was to attack both the human and demon realms. In order to do so, they had to cross the river Styx. Although Emperor Hades was the master of the river Styx, his background was actually that of the human race. He'd stayed here to separate the Yao and humans because of the human race's insiders. For the past 100 years, they had been researching how to deal with Emperor Hades, mainly through his great Tao and his cultivation technique. Over the years, they had gradually come up with some ways to fight against it. They were just waiting for the next step to perfect it. However, this was the most secretive information within their ranks, and it was impossible for it to be leaked to the public. Or was there a mole among them? When he thought of this, Shoppenkuan's expression changed again and again. But right now, he couldn't afford to panic. The Sand Divine General doesn't look too good? Emperor Hades chuckled from within the clouds. Shoppenkuan immediately cursed under his breath. He had been so worried that news would leak out that he hadn't been able to hide his expression. With an embarrassed smile, Sha Kunpeng cupped his fists and said, "I've been a little busy lately, so I'm a little tired. Thank you for your concern, Emperor Hades. I see. You demons do have a lot of things to deal with. It's not surprising that the Sand General is exhausted." As he spoke, the misty Emperor Hades returned to his seat. Shopenkuen's eyes widened, and the veins on his neck bulged involuntarily. What did Emperor Hades mean by this? Shopenkuen questioned himself over and over again. He clearly knew everything he'd just said. Cold sweat instantly soaked his robes. At the same time, Emperor Hades spoke again. "I advise the Sand Divine General not to seek revenge on the person who killed your son, because Yu Yao cannot cross the river Styx." In the blink of an eye, the entire hall was reduced to nothingness. Countless bolts of lightning crackled through the hall. It was as if the end of the world had arrived. Fierce winds howled and the clouds churned. Shopenkuen and Yu Dai, who were caught in the middle of it all, trembled violently. Their arms trembled uncontrollably. "When you return to the Yao realm, tell your old freaks that although I, Pan Jingtian, don't care about worldly affairs, I'm no fool. I know all about their shady dealings. If you really want to cross the river Styx, go find the Eastern Monarch Tai and meet me at my palace." As soon as he finished speaking, the howling winds reached Shopenkuen and the others. By the time they came to their senses, they were already out of the river Styx. Emperor Hades knows? Yu Dai frowned as she stood on the banks of the river Styx. Shopenkuen's brows were also furrowed. After a long while, he glanced at Yu Dai and said, "Take Ming-Er back to the clan and reconstruct his body. I'm going to pay a visit to the Yao realm's sacred land." Yu Dai's expression shifted, but to her surprise, Shopenkuen forcefully shook his head and clenched his fists. "I'm just going to pass on the message. If possible, I want to withdraw." As a Yao Divine General, Shopenkuen was naturally no weakling. However, Emperor Hades's warning and the unfathomable strength he'd revealed forced Shopenkuen to reconsider his organization's plan. Was it really that feasible? Not just for him, but for the clan behind him as well. He had to think things over carefully. "Master, Shopenkuen and the others have already left." The young man who had brought Sha Kunpeng into Hades' Emperor's temporary imperial residence walked in. He'd gone out to check on Shopenkuen and his wife. As soon as they left the river Styx, he'd immediately returned to report. "Of course they have to leave. Do you really think they can attack my palace with just the two of them?" By now, the clouds around Emperor Hades had already dispersed. It was hard to imagine that this supreme expert, Emperor Hades, was actually a fair-skinned youth. Judging from his appearance, he was probably no more than 15 years old. However, his blue eyes contained an incomprehensible sense of vicissitude. He was dressed in long purple robes, and his waist-length hair casually fell to his shoulders. His fair fingers clutched a teacup, and his other hand held an ancient tome as he silently read it. The two of them naturally wouldn't dare attack Master's palace, but since you've pointed it out so bluntly, aren't you afraid that they— The youth hesitated. "What's there to be afraid of?" Emperor Hades chuckled and tossed the tome onto the long table in front of his chair. He stretched lazily, a faint look of disdain in his eyes. "They've been very restless lately. I'm afraid they already know that my true body has been trapped by the Tao heart, and that I've lost less than 1/10 of my strength. But without the Eastern Monarch Tai, crossing the river Styx is nothing more than a pipe dream. I want to tell them and make them fearful. Who knows, it might even buy my true body some time." "How do you know that the Eastern Monarch Tai isn't involved?" The youth furrowed his brows. The way he saw it, his master was being a little too arrogant. He clearly knew that the Yao were preparing to deal with him, yet he hadn't made any arrangements. Instead, he'd taken the initiative to point it out. This was really too dangerous. "Him. I know him." Emperor Hades sighed softly. Although he didn't explain much, his indifferent tone was filled with indescribable certainty. Just as Emperor Hades was about to pick up the tome again, he seemed to think of something else and spoke to the youth. Chapter 1144. Wei Jie was in a daze. The entire hall was so quiet that even the sound of a pin dropping could be heard. The youth in the hall also stared at Ming Di in a daze. Disciple. The youth frowned and said nothing for a long time. Emperor Hades glanced at him, saw his hesitation, then returned his gaze to his tome. Without even looking back, he said, "If you know him, then you know him. If you don't know him, then you don't know him. Just answer." Given Emperor Hades's abilities, since he'd asked this question, he naturally knew everything. Trying to hide it was pointless. The young man also realized this and nodded. "I do." Emperor Hades nodded in satisfaction, then put down his tome. He sat upright in his chair and smiled at the youth. "If you know him, then it'll be easy. In a moment, go pack up and bring him here." "Master, you want to see him? This is. If I tell you to go, then go." Instantly, the entire hall was enveloped in a solemn aura. The youth immediately knelt and prostrated himself, burying his head in the ground. "Yes, master." At Little White's call, Yi Zichen's acquaintances from the modern realm returned one after another. When they saw him, they couldn't help but be astonished. Among them were people from the Beast region, the Heavenly Court, the Underworld, the Immortal region. There were over 100 of them. A grand banquet was also held in Xiao Bai's residence. The banquet lasted for 3 days. "Ha!" Yi Zichen stretched lazily, then got up from his bed. The headache from drinking hadn't gotten any better. His entire body reeked of alcohol, and he covered his head with his hands. "It's been a long time since I've been this drunk." However, after a brief chuckle, he used his immortal spiritual power to disperse the smell of alcohol. Drunkenness made it easy for people to forget their worries and stress, but right now, he needed to be absolutely sober. "Uncle Yi." Suddenly, the door to the room was pushed open. Bai Bailing rushed in from the outside. "Bailing, who told you to be so rash?" The instant she opened the door, she heard Bai Qiao's rebuke. Before long, Bai Qiao appeared. When she saw that Yi Zichen was awake, she couldn't help but say, "Big brother Yi, don't mind me. I'll teach Bailing a lesson when I get back." "It's fine." Yi Zichen waved at Bai Qiao, then walked over to them, having already put on his shoes. "Is Lil White looking for me?" "No, Upheaval's gang leader Wei came. He said you sent him." Bai Qiao shook her head. Only then did Yi Zichen remember that last night, when he was drunk, he'd sent Wei Jie a message asking him to come over. If it weren't for the mother and daughter duo, he would have forgotten about it. "I'll be right there." In the front hall of the Bai residence, Wei Jie frowned as he sat on a chair. Beside him were several Peak Sky immortal experts, including the second commander of the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. Last night, he'd suddenly received a message from Yi Zichen, telling him to come to the Parliament of Stars' second pavilion heads by manner. His first thought was whether or not Yi Zichen's identity had been exposed, so he immediately sent him a message to ask. However, this message was like a stone sinking into the ocean, and there was no response at all. Worried about Yi Zichen's safety, he gathered his troops and stationed all of Upheaval's elites near the Parliament of Stars cities. As long as he gave the order, those elites would immediately launch an attack on the Parliament of Stars. He, on the other hand, brought along a few Immortal King-level experts and Leijin, and rushed to Blue Sky City overnight. "I wonder how long it will be before I can see Brother Yi." Wei Jie, who hadn't seen Yi Zichen for a long time, was filled with impatience. He frowned at Little White, who sat in the center of the room. He'd lost count of how many times he'd said the same thing. "Gang leader Wei, please be patient. A few nights ago, I held a banquet here. Elder brother Yi fell asleep drunk in the early hours of the morning. I don't know if he has woken up yet, but I've already asked my wife and daughter to call him. He should be here soon." Little White kindly replied. Wei Jie couldn't help but raise his brows when he heard this. Big brother Yi? Drunk? Before he could figure out what was going on, Bai Qiao and Bai Bailing led Yi Zichen into the hall. Whitey, Wei Jie. Boss! Wei Jie and Whitey spoke at nearly the same time. Hearing the other party's reply, the two of them looked at each other. Wei Jie looked at Whitey in confusion, but Whitey just nodded and smiled. Wei Jie ignored Little White and walked up to Yi Zichen's side. He deliberately lowered his voice and said, Boss, what's going on? Why is the second pavilion master of the Parliament of Stars calling you boss? Just now, he said you drank too much last night and that you got drunk? As he spoke, Wei Jie kept glancing at Whitey. However, when Whitey sensed his gaze, it nodded and chuckled. Wei Jie couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine. The Parliament of Stars and Upheaval had fought each other countless times, both openly and in secret. Now that the second pavilion master of the Parliament of Stars was treating him like this, he really wasn't used to it. Yi Zichen ignored Wei Jie's suspicions and smiled at Little White. Little White, there are no outsiders here, right? These are all my direct subordinates. There are no outsiders. Little White pursed his lips and nodded. Yi Zichen turned to Wei Jie and said, In truth, the Parliament of Stars is on our side, but don't tell your subordinates. Otherwise, they'll think we're enemies. On the same side? Wei Jie thought he'd misheard. He confirmed it several times, then asked in shock, What's going on? You don't know. With that, Little White helped Yi Zichen explain why he didn't want to merge, and why he wanted them to remain enemies. After explaining everything, Wei Jie revealed a smile of understanding. There's actually such a coincidence? If we merge, doesn't that mean all the factions in the lower lands will have to submit to us? Boss, why don't we merge? Wei Jie didn't understand. Yi Zichen glanced meaningfully at Little White, who had no choice but to repeat Yi Zichen's idea to Wei Jie. Brilliant! When he heard the last part, Wei Jie couldn't help but clap his hands in admiration. He hadn't thought too deeply about the stakes involved. He'd just been thinking about how powerful they'd become if they merged, but he'd forgotten that the people of the Divine Mountains absolutely wouldn't tolerate them being the sole ruler. Even if this was only the lower lands. That's why only the higher-ups of our gang need to know about this, and only our most trusted subordinates. Everyone else can continue to think of the Parliament of Stars as enemies, but don't fight too fiercely. Just don't go overboard. Don't let your subordinates get angry. That's no problem. Wei Jie gestured with his hand, and the jade slip at his waist flashed with red light. He nodded at Yi Zichen and Little White, then poured his immortal awareness into it. Instantly Wei Jie frowned. When Yi Zichen saw this, he asked, What's wrong? What's wrong? Wei Jie put the jade slip away, shook his head, and smiled. Chapter 1145. The Gao family's internal strife. Wei Jie's eyes flashed as he glanced at Yi Zichen. 20% of the factions in the lower lands had yet to unite, and most of them belonged to families sent down from the Divine Mountains. They all had the backing of the Divine Mountains, so most of them disdained Upheaval and the Parliament of Stars factions. Ice Blue City's Gao family was one of them. Yi Zichen didn't answer right away. Instead, he sat on a chair and pondered. Little White glanced at the two of them and couldn't help but speak up. Are you talking about the Gao family sent down by the Lightning Emperor's Shao family? When he said that, Wei Jie and Yi Zichen both looked at him. The Parliament of Stars knows about this too? Although Yi Zichen had already told Wei Jie that the Parliament of Stars was on his side, they'd been at war for over half a year, and there had been constant friction between them. Suddenly saying they were on the same side was still a bit jarring, so much so that when they spoke, it sounded as though they were going tit for tat. Little White understood, so he didn't mind Wei Jie's tone. He frowned and nodded. I know a bit, but not all that much. However, Yin Shang specifically told us to watch out for the Lightning Emperor's Shao family. Boss. Although Lil White didn't finish his sentence, Yi Zichen already knew what he wanted to convey. It seemed the Shao family and Yin Shang weren't on the same side. Gao Yunting and the Gao family's falling out was absolutely good news for Yi Zichen. He'd be delighted to see the Shao family's backyard in flames. But as for whether or not to interfere, he had no choice but to consider it carefully. Exposing himself to the Shao family too early wasn't necessarily a good thing. What's the Gao family's situation like right now? As soon as he finished speaking, Wei Jie immediately responded. Our spies sent word that Gao Yunting has gathered all of his forces and is launching a counterattack against the Gao family. More than 40% of the Gao family's subordinate clans and factions are on his side. The odds are 60 to 40, but no matter who wins in the end, the Gao family's forces will suffer the most. Yi Zichen shook his head. Although Wei Jie's answers were detailed, he didn't get the information he wanted. Since the Gao family was in chaos, there was no way the Shao family wouldn't send any reinforcements. He wanted to know which side the Shao family was on. Boss. Wei Jie sensed Yi Zichen's dissatisfaction with the news, so he probed. Yi Zichen didn't beat around the bush. Didn't the Shao family come? Wei Jie was at a loss for words. His subordinates hadn't mentioned the Shao family when they'd sent him the message. The contents were all about the Gao family and what they were going to do. At this time, Wei Jie's jade slip suddenly flashed with light. He lifted the jade slip and probed it with his immortal sense. Not long after, he put it down again and said with a smile, "Boss, you really are amazing. As soon as you mentioned the Shao family, our subordinates said that the head of the Gao family brought several supreme-level experts with him. As soon as the supreme-level experts appeared, Gao Yunting's forces were immediately routed. He's already making his final desperate counterattack. Those supreme experts must have been sent by the Shao family." That's right. Yi Zichen nodded calmly, then understood the situation. Let's not interfere with the Gao family's affairs. Let them fight amongst themselves. Wei Jie nodded. Now that the Shao family had sent reinforcements, even if they wanted to attack, they wouldn't be able to escape unscathed. Rather than forcefully interfering with the Gao family and wasting their forces, they might as well sit back and watch the tigers fight. Don't stay here for too long, said Yi Zichen calmly. Yi Zichen's eyes flashed with inexplicable, vicious light. When you get back, pay close attention to the Gao family's situation. Although the Gao family has the protection of the Shao family, that doesn't mean they'll stay there forever. So long as they leave. You know what I mean, right? Yi Zichen had a deep grudge with the Shao family ever since he was in the Three Realms. Although he wasn't strong enough to deal with the Lightning Emperor's Shao family yet, he'd deal with them as interest. Wei Jie's eyes lit up and he smirked and nodded. Understood. Upheaval's grandiose group left Little White's residence. As someone who'd been by Yi Zichen's side this entire time, Little White was well aware of the conflict between the Shao family and Yi Zichen. He also knew just how deep his boss's hatred for the Shao family ran. In that incomparable war, the Beast Region, Immortal Region, Heavenly Court, and Underworld had all suffered grievous losses. Among them were warriors who'd shed blood for the sake of their descendants, as well as friends and lovers who were extremely important to Yi Zichen. After all that, Little White knew just how shaken Yi Zichen's heart was when he heard about the Lightning Emperor's Shao family despite his calm exterior. Xia Kiki. She died to help him block divine lightning, hadn't she? Boss. He wanted to say something to comfort Yi Zichen, but he didn't know what to say. Little White was no longer a simple, useless poodle. His experiences had taught him what he could say and what he could only keep to himself. In the end, all he could say was a gentle pat on the shoulder. Yi Zichen sensed Little White's worry and couldn't help but smile. It's nothing. You don't have to be like this. Besides, Kiki might not even be dead. Boss, you're saying? Little White's eyes instantly widened. He saw Yi Zichen smile at him, then look across the river Styx and sighed. She might be deep within the Yao realm, but I'm not too sure. Gu Zichen was the one who'd told him all this information. He had no way of knowing for sure whether it was true or not, but he'd rather believe it was. I'll send someone to investigate right away. If I find out anything, I'll let you know right away. Then I'll leave it to you. There's no need for that. Little White grinned at Yi Zichen, then left in a hurry. He was most likely going to contact his clan to investigate Xia Kik's situation. Celestial devourer dogs were primordial divine beasts, after all. They'd more or less interacted with sacred dragons. With Little White's help, it might not be long before they found out whether Xia Kik's information was true or not. So long as he closed his eyes, Yi Zichen's mind would still be filled with images of Xia Kiki in her golden dragon form. She'd used her body to shield him from the heavenly lightning. She'd let the lightning shatter her dragon's scales until she died. He'd never forget that for the rest of his life. At the same time, he'd never forget his enmity with the Shao family. While the Shao family's divine lightning had repelled him, it had harmed far too many people important to him. This enmity. He'd get his revenge. Chapter 1146. What crime? Yellow Spring City. This city was one of the cities in the Sky Great District beneath the northern Divine Mountain. The Gao family was the leader of the city. Due to the fact that the pale yellow seawater of the Sea of Innocence flowed through the city every autumn and stagnated there for several months, the city was named the Yellow Springs. It meant that yellow spring water flowed from the heavens. But on this day, Yellow Spring City became the real Yellow Spring City. Inside the city, the sky was covered in blood. The entire city was filled with corpses. There were armored soldiers among them, as well as innocent people in the city. Blood dyed the waters of the Sea of Innocence red and flowed through the city. Blood seeped out from the gap of the tightly shut city gate. Yellow Spring City was as its name suggested. A massive mansion sat in the center of the city. This was the Gao family's residence. Tens of thousands of sky immortals and immortal kings surrounded the entire courtyard, leaving not even a drop of water trickling through. Surrounded by these experts, there was a man in blood-red armor, soaked in blood. His eyes were bloodshot as he stared at everything around him. The blade in his hand had been bent, and the armor on his body was covered with cuts. His immortal energy had dried up, and the pills in his bottle were all gone. He looked at the corpses lying around him, clad in armor the same color as his own. He looked at his subordinates, who'd already bowed their heads to him. He looked at the dozens of trusted subordinates still fighting to the death. He looked at the sky immortals and immortal kings in the sky. He couldn't ascend to the heavens, nor could he descend to the earth. He was talking about this moment. Then he looked at the two men standing on divine swords. If it weren't for them, he wouldn't have lost so thoroughly. However, in the end, he cast a venomous gaze at the middle-aged man who was looking at him with a sinister glint in his eyes. This was the head of the Gao family, Gao Xiong. He was also the father of this despairing man. Gao Yunting, do you know your crimes? Gao Xiong stared at the rivers of blood in front of him, but his expression didn't change in the slightest. Under the protection of several sword-wielding immortal monarchs, he looked at the man who bore a slight resemblance to him with a pained expression. Trapped like turtles in a jar, Gao Yunting and his trusted aides were still fighting back, but 3 fists were no match for 4 hands. One by one, they fell into pools of blood. In less than an hour, he'd gathered an army of hundreds of thousands of immortals. In the end, he was the only one left standing. Heh! He stabbed the sword in his hand into the ground to ensure that he wouldn't fall. Gao Yunting narrowed his eyes, his gaze filled with ridicule as he looked at Gao Xiong, Gao Ruilong, and Kai Renfei. He had been fooled. However, he did not regret it. Perhaps Kai Renfei had lied to him, but to him, it was just an excuse to start a rebellion. As early as 10 years ago, he had already wanted to rebel, but he did not have a suitable reason. However, not long ago, The Gao family's suspicions and Kai Renfei's provocation gave him this reason. That very night, he gathered his forces and attacked Yellow Spring City with lightning speed, forcing Gao Xiong and the others into a passive position. However, he never would have guessed that the Shao family would send reinforcements. Supremes were invincible in the lower lands. His defeat was understandable. However, Gao Xiong had asked if he admitted to his crimes. "What crimes have I committed?" Gao Yunting wiped the blood from his face and roared, his eyes bloodshot. "You say I'm guilty? Then tell me what crimes I've committed." "You still dare quibble?" Gao Ruilong narrowed his eyes. "The truth is right in front of you. What else do you have to say?" "Shut up." Gao Yunting's thunderous roar shook Gao Ruilong so badly that he trembled. His lips quivered, but he didn't say anything. "Gao Xiong, do you dare say that you had nothing to do with my current predicament?" After rebuking Gao Ruilong, Gao Yunting laughed wantonly. "Ever since I was a child, you always told me that I would be the future head of the Gao family, that I would inherit your position and serve the Lightning Emperor's family on the Divine Mountains. Did you know that I didn't care about the Shao family at all? But I always remembered that I was the head of the family. I entered the spirit realm when I was 9 and became an immortal at 13. I'm now an immortal king, but where's the position of family head you promised me? You doted on your new lover, and you doted on the son she gave birth to. Gradually, you stopped seeing me, and instead doted on your new lover's child. Back then, the confidants you trained for me all told me that the position of family head might change hands. I didn't believe them. I firmly believed that I was the future family head. But you really let me down, really. You probably forgot the promise you made to a youth. You probably didn't know that your joke back then had become that youth's dream for decades. You ask me if I admit to my crimes, but in the end, you betrayed me. What crimes have I committed?" The surrounding Gao family clansmen were indifferent. The older generation knew that every word Gao Yunting said was the truth. There was no exaggeration or falsehood in his words. More than a decade ago, they truly believed that Gao Yunting was the next family head. However, after the family head took in a new wife and gave birth to a son, everything changed. Quite a few people looked at Gao Yunting sympathetically. Gao Xiong, however, glanced at him indifferently, then pushed aside the immortal kings blocking his path. He looked at Gao Yunting coldly, then said, "Don't worry, Gao Yunting. So this is the answer you gave me, right?" "You forced me to do this," roared Gao Yunting. Unexpectedly, when he saw Gao Yunting's bloodshot eyes, Gao Xiong smiled calmly. "Did you know? I never blamed you for your rebellion. On the contrary, I supported it." The onlookers were in an uproar. Gao Yunting frowned and looked at his father, his eyes filled with confusion. Then he heard his father say, then he said, "I nurtured trusted subordinates for you and Ruilong, all to give you a level playing field. You say I favored him, but did I ever give him more resources than you?" Gao Yunting's heart trembled. If he thought about it carefully, he hadn't. "I didn't pass on my position to you because I was hesitant between you and your brother. I wanted to see you display your strength, for example. Rebel against me. I fully support that. If you defeat me, then you defeat me. With you in charge, the family will only grow stronger and stronger. I'd be happy to see that happen. But I'm disappointed in you." Gao Xiong's expression instantly grew cold. He looked down at Gao Yunting and snorted. "You had a few decades to consolidate your power, but in the end, this is what you gave me. The people who followed you will all die tragically. In the future, they will all carry the name of traitor. Their families and descendants will all bear this hat. This is all given to them by you. Of course, that's nothing. Compared to me, you're still too immature. I don't blame you for losing. But your stupidity disappoints me. What's wrong with that? You speak with conviction, but do you think I'll condemn you for your betrayal?" Chapter 1147. The position of family head 1,000 years ago, The Gao family's ancestor performed a great service for the Shao family and was sent to Yellow Springs City. Even though they had to hand over a corresponding amount of resources every 50 years, the Gao family used the Lightning Emperor's Shao family as an excuse to keep quite a bit of resources for their own use. The family grew stronger day by day. However, all of this depended on the Gao family's timely handing over of resources. A few days ago, the Gao family's ancestor contacted Gao Xiong and asked about the missing resources. Before long, the Shao family sent people to investigate. However, he never would have guessed that the emissary they'd sent had died at the transaction site. Embezzling resources is one thing. You could have turned back after handing them over. But you, how dare you plot against the emissary we sent? Gao Yunting, you're truly audacious. Gao Xiong looked at Gao Yunting with disappointment in his eyes. Between him and Gao Ruilong, he was more inclined to let Gao Yunting take the position of family head once he returned to the Divine Mountains. His goal in nurturing Gao Ruilong was simply to temper his temperament. He never would have guessed that he'd do something so disobedient. I didn't plot against the emissary, roared Gao Yunting. He couldn't refute the accusation of embezzling resources. He'd kept 20% for himself, but he hadn't plotted against the emissary. He didn't have the ability to do so. I handed over the resources to the emissary and returned to the clan with my trusted aides. The emissary was still fine when I left. Besides, the emissary the Shao family sent was at least a supreme. How could I have plotted against him? You didn't? The boss's people are right here. Do you think I'm lying to trick you? Gao Xiong glared fiercely at Gao Yunting, whose eyes were bloodshot. His entire face was twisted with rage. You're still refusing to admit it even now? Then tell me, if you didn't plot against the emissary, where did you get the resources to train your subordinate? The emissary gave them to me. All right, enough. Gao Xiong's disappointment in Gao Yunting grew greater and greater. Gao Xiong knew that his son wasn't strong enough to deal with the emissary. The only reason he'd asked him that question was because he wanted him to reveal who his accomplices were. As long as he pushed all the blame to his accomplice and said that he had no choice, then as his father, he might have a chance to plead for mercy for him and let him live. But he said that the special envoy gave it to him. What a ridiculous answer it was. Taking a deep breath, Gao Xiong no longer paid attention to his son. He'd fought for everything he could for his son, but he hadn't grasped it. He couldn't blame anyone else for this. He bowed deeply to the Shao family, then heard Gao Xiong speak. Sir Envoy, please do it. These words determined Gao Yunting's fate. He screamed at the top of his lungs that he was wrongly accused, but no one listened to him. His trusted aides fell one after another. He looked at them lying in pools of blood until he was the only one left on the battlefield. The emissary landed in front of Gao Yunting, staring at him with the coldest of eyes. It was all over. A bitter smile tugged at Gao Yunting's lips. The clouds in the sky blotted out the sun. The howling wind blew against his face, causing the bitter smile on his face to grow wider and wider. He looked around blankly. All he saw was disappointment, pity, and mockery from Gao Ruilong's faction. In the end, his gaze fell onto Chiron Fei. Gao Yunting stared back at him, his eyes calm and emotionless. Second brother, you found yourself a good advisor. Gao Yunting smiled sinisterly at Gao Ruilong, then turned his head, picked up the sword he'd stabbed into the ground, and held it across his neck. Splurt! An arrow of blood gushed out of his neck, and Gao Yunting's sword fell to the ground with a thud. When he saw Gao Yunting commit suicide, Gao Xiong subconsciously averted his gaze. No matter what, he was still a father. How could he bear to watch his own son die without doing anything? At that moment, the Shao family's special envoy picked up Gao Yunting's corpse. When Gao Xiong saw this, he immediately spoke. Sir Envoy, what are you? We have to take him back to report on our mission, said the special envoy atop the immortal sword. Before Gao Xiong could respond, another special envoy spoke up. Although the criminal has been executed, your Gao family still hasn't handed over their resources on time. I'll give you 3 days to hand them over. Otherwise, you know what will happen to you. With 2 flashes of light, the special envoys left the Shao family residence. Everyone silently watched Gao Xiong, who stood in the center of the courtyard, trembling uncontrollably. His fists were clenched and unclenched. Men, take an inventory of Yellow Springs City's dead citizens and clansmen. Compensate them accordingly. Remove Gao Yunting's name from the family records, as well as all of his direct descendants. Gao Ruelong will be the next head of the Gao family. The succession will take place in 3 months. That's all. With that, Gao Xiong silently turned and walked back to his room in the courtyard. As he spoke, he seemed to age several decades. His bleak figure caused the members of the Gao family to sigh in pity. Seeing his son die before him, he must not feel good about it either. However, among these people, there was a group of people who were in high spirits. These people were Gao Ruelong's direct subordinate. Farewell, father. He bowed deeply to Gao Xiong. After he left, Gao Ruelong straightened his back and looked around. The Gao family clansmen immediately bowed in his direction. Although they didn't call out his name, he knew. He wasn't far off. In 3 months, he would be the head of the Gao family. Gao Yunting's betrayal had dyed Yellow Springs City in the color of blood. Cries and wails filled the air, but Gao Ruelong's mansion was brightly lit, and a banquet was being held. At the banquet, everyone congratulated Gao Ruelong and addressed him as family head. Gao Ruelong was overjoyed. It wasn't until the wee hours of the morning that the banquet finally ended. Gao Ruelong returned to his room, his face flushed with success. Perhaps someone was deliberately trying to please him, but someone had hidden a little girl in the room. When Gao Ruelong saw her, he immediately grinned and threw himself at her. At this moment, there was a sudden and urgent knock on the door. Who is it? Chapter 1148. Gao Ruelong's death. Let's talk about it tomorrow. I'm busy right now. How could Gao Ruelong have the time to deal with Kai Renfei on such a beautiful day and with the beautiful woman waiting for him in the room? Besides, he didn't have much of a good impression of Kai Renfei to begin with. If he hadn't plotted against Gao Yunting and won the position of family head, Gao Ruelong wouldn't have bothered to say a word to him. I just came to see if young Master Ruelong has any other requests, said Kai Renfei with a smile. No. Hurry up and scram. The beautiful woman was still lying on the bed. His heart itched, and he didn't want to waste any more time with Kai Renfei. All he wanted to do right now was get rid of this eyesore so he could spend some quality time with his beautiful woman. When he heard Gao Ruelong's impatient tone, Kai Renfei smiled in understanding. Then this subordinate will take his leave. He bowed to Gao Ruelong and left. Little did he know that the moment he closed the door, the beautiful woman nodded at Kai Renfei through the crack in the door. The door was tightly shut. The beautiful woman and Gao Ruelong were left alone in the bedroom. When he saw the beautiful woman lying on the bed, Gao Ruelong's heart burned with passion. He pounced on the bed. But he missed. The beautiful woman carefully dodged to the side as he pounced. Gao Ruelong immediately tried to hug her, only to discover that she was pushing him away. "Milord, don't be so impatient." The sweet voice almost melted Gao Ruelong's bones. This sentence also pushed the hormone secretion in Gao Ruelong's heart to the extreme. He forcefully suppressed the fire in his belly. Before long, he heard the beautiful woman laugh. "I hear you're the future head of the Gao family?" "Of course. In 3 months, I'll inherit the position of head. Beauty, if you can serve me well today, then you'll be the wife of the Gao family's head." Gao Ruelong's arrogant smile was tinged with perversion. The beautiful woman's eyes flashed with yearning. She pursed her lips and smiled. "Then I'm sure you've already gotten tired of playing the normal way. Why don't we change it up?" "Oh? You have a new trick?" Gao Ruelong raised his eyebrows and saw the beauty take out a long piece of cloth from under her pillow. It was obvious that she had prepared this beforehand. Sir, please close your eyes. Gao Ruelong couldn't refuse her flirtatious tone. He really wanted to try this new trick, so he obediently closed his eyes and let the beauty cover his eyes with the cloth. Then, she pushed him onto the bed. After that, his hands and feet were tied to the head of the bed by the beauty. Gao Ruelong couldn't see anything, and his hands and feet were tied up. This inexplicably excited him. Beauty, just what sort of tricks do you have up your sleeves? Hurry up and show it to yours truly. Very soon. Please be patient, my lord. As soon as the flirtatious voice fell, the beautiful woman's face instantly darkened. Then, she pulled out a sharp dagger from under the bed and fiercely stabbed it towards her heart. Blood spurted out and dyed the beauty's face red. At the same time, the beauty used a piece of cloth to cover Gao Ruelong's mouth without making a sound. With his hands and feet tied up, he could only whimper and stare back and forth. After a few breaths of time, he stopped struggling. I killed someone, I killed someone. The beauty sitting on the bed clutched the dagger in Gao Ruelong's chest and muttered. Just then, the door to the room was pushed open. The beauty curled up like a bird startled by the mere twang of a bough. Well done. The person who walked in was none other than Kai Renfei, whom Gao Ruelong had chased away. He smiled calmly and walked to the side of the bed. Looking at the dagger in Gao Ruelong's chest, he viciously pulled it out and stabbed it again. After stabbing, Gao Ruelong's body trembled violently. At this time, Kai Renfei lifted the cloth covering his eyes. You! Gao Ruelong stared and wanted to say something, but Kai Renfei didn't give him the chance. He pulled the dagger out and stabbed it again. Blood gushed out of Gao Ruelong's body and dyed the entire bed red. His eyes rolled back. He was completely dead. The woman wearing only a muslin dress looked slightly panicked. She was actually just an ordinary woman. She didn't even have the strength to truss a chicken. This was also the reason why Gao Ruelong had completely let his guard down around her. This was also the reason why Kai Renfei had chosen her. Half a year ago, Kai Renfei had been searching for a suitable candidate. In the end, he'd decided to use this woman. She had no cultivation base at all. She was beautiful. Although Gao Ruelong was useless, that didn't mean he didn't have his guard up. Only a woman like this could make him let down his guard. Gao Ruelong had believed that this woman posed no threat to him, which was why he'd been so careless. He hadn't expected that the rope binding his hands and feet would be the immortal binding rope, and that the dagger would be a top-grade immortal artifact. This was all part of Kai Renfei's plan. He'd instigated Gao Yunting's rebellion, then assassinated Gao Ruelong. Everything had been within his grasp. Your Excellency. The eyes of the beauty who had just killed someone were still filled with panic. Her pupils shrank violently and her chest heaved up and down. You've done well. Your son is currently in the Earth Great District's Baofeng City. As he spoke, Kai Renfei took out a spatial pouch and tossed it onto the bed. Here's your travel expenses and your reward for this operation. There's also an escape route inside. As for whether or not you can escape, that's up to you. Thank you, Your Excellency. She grabbed the pouch and ran barefoot out of the courtyard, not even bothering to put on her clothes. However, before she could run out the door, a streak of spiritual energy pierced through her back. In an instant, a fist-sized bloody hole appeared on his chest. I'm truly sorry, but I can't let you leave. The Gao family has too many spies. If they notice you, I'll be exposed. However, I'll ask someone to take good care of your son. Kai Renfei glanced indifferently at the dead woman, then waved his arm and retrieved the immortal binding rope binding Gao Ruelong. However, he left the dagger behind. He purposefully messed up the room, creating signs of a struggle, then retrieved the woman's spatial pouch. It took Kai Renfei a full hour to take care of everything. Then, he took out a rag from his spatial ring, placed it in Gao Ruelong's hand, then quietly left the courtyard. The next morning, the sky began to brighten. Kai Renfei was sitting on the roof of his own courtyard when he finally saw someone enter Gao Ruilong's residence. Less than half a minute after he'd entered. "Young Master Ruilong is dead." As the attendant cried out in alarm, the news of Gao Ruilong's death spread. Kai Renfei, who had seen all of this, pursed his lips into a smile. Chapter 1149. Grief. Gao Xiong, who just experienced the pain of losing his son, hadn't slept at all. In order to calm his emotions, he'd meditated in the courtyard all night. Gao Xiong sat cross-legged on the ground like an old monk in meditation. Even his breathing was faintly discernible. Suddenly, his ears twitched and he opened his eyes. He glanced at the courtyard door and saw one of his trusted subordinates hurrying in his direction. Family Head. His trusted aide was still wearing the heavy armor he'd worn for battle. Although Gao Xiong hadn't slept all night, his subordinates had been preparing for the funeral and hadn't rested either. Gao Xiong's thick, ink-black brows were tightly furrowed, forming the character Chuan. His expression was grave, and he seemed to want to say something, but was hesitant to do so. Gao Xiong's eyes darkened. "What's wrong, Ai? If you have something to say, just say it." The man Gao Xiong called Ai pursed his lips. He clenched his sword in his right hand, then relaxed and sighed deeply. "Family Head, when I'm done speaking, please don't get too worked up." Gao Xiong's brows furrowed. He hadn't expected anything to cause him to get so worked up. At most, he'd run into problems like calming the citizens and compensating them. All of that could be solved with a bit of money. Although he'd still have to hand over resources to the Xiao family, he could still fork out the money to compensate the citizens. When Ai heard this, he pursed his lips and took a step back, his heavy armor clanking. "Young Master Gao Ruilong, What happened to him?" asked Gao Xiong, frowning. "He was murdered last night." As soon as he finished speaking, Gao Xiong's eyes widened. He instantly coughed up a mouthful of blood and splattered on the cobblestone road in front of him. Family Head. Ai, who'd come to report the situation, turned pale with fright. He hurriedly ran behind Gao Xiong, grabbed him by the back, and poured the purest immortal spiritual energy into his body. When the spiritual energy entered his body, he discovered that Gao Xiong's veins were in serious disorder. His spiritual energy was also quite violent, rushing through his meridians without any pattern. Ai immediately used his own immortal spiritual energy to guide Gao Xiong's spiritual energy until it completely stabilized. Then, he took out a pill from his spatial ring and stuffed it into Gao Xiong's mouth. Cough, cough. After coughing up the blood clot in his throat, the unconscious Gao Xiong opened his eyes again. His eyes were lifeless and his face was pale as he pushed Ai's hand away. He spoke in his weakest voice. "You said Ruilong was killed?" After waking up, Gao Xiong seemed to have aged a few decades. The pain of losing his son the day before had left him exhausted, but who would have thought? Less than 24 hours later, his other son would die as well? Ai grit his teeth and nodded as he looked at Gao Xiong, who was unbearably old. Yes. Just now, someone came to report that when he went to young Master Ruilong's residence, he saw clear signs of a fight in the courtyard. When he entered the house, he saw young Master Ai lying in the living room. He was stabbed through the heart with a sharp chi. There was also a dead woman in his residence. She seemed to be a prostitute, and her chest had been completely pierced through by spiritual energy. Ruilong. Gao Xiong sat up, leaning against Ai. His body trembled violently, and his once fierce eyes were now lifeless and desolate. "Family Head, please don't be too sad. You're the backbone of the Gao family. If anything happens to you, our family will truly fall into disarray." For a long while, Gao Xiong remained immersed in his grief over Gao Ruilong's death. It wasn't until an hour later that he finally emerged from his sorrow and stood up with the help of Ai. His eyes were filled with sorrow as he murmured, Take me there. Gao Ruelong's death had shaken the entire Gao family. Yesterday, he'd been told by the family head that he would inherit the position of head of the Gao family in 3 months. Now that he'd been killed the next day, it was a huge blow to the Gao family. Family elders, retainers, anyone with any authority in the Gao family had come to Gao Ruelong's residence. Quite a few other clansmen had heard the news and hurried over to watch. At the very center of the crowd sat a beautiful woman in a long purple dress. She was Gao Ruelong's birth mother, Gao Xiong's wife, the wife of the previous head of the Kai family, and Kai Renfei's birth mother. Li Lu. She didn't cry, nor did she throw a tantrum. She just sat there in a daze, her white hair draped over her shoulders. Gao Ruelong lay dead on her lap. Unbeknownst to them, this was the most worrying of all. There was no greater sorrow than a dead heart. That was exactly what Li Lu was feeling right now. My condolences, madam. The family elders and retainers all offered words of comfort, but Li Lu just sat there in a daze. She didn't respond at all. While everyone was shaking their heads in pity, a commotion broke out in the crowd, and someone shouted, "The family head is here." Instantly, a path opened up in front of the residence's entrance. Before long, they saw Ai supporting Gao Xiong as they slowly walked into the residence. Family head. Everyone bowed in greeting. Gao Xiong ignored them and walked up to Gao Ruelong. He glanced coolly at the motionless Gao Ruelong on the ground, then at the white-haired Li Lu, who looked like a living corpse. Deep in his eyes, a faint trace of desolation flashed through them. He squeezed his eyes shut and let out a long sigh. Who was the first to notice? A man in a plain robe walked out of the crowd and knelt to the ground. "It's the young one. You. What are you doing in Ruelong's residence? Aren't you supposed to be pacifying the commoners in the city?" Under Gao Xiong's gaze, the man shivered uncontrollably, as if he'd been plunged into a bottomless pit of ice. He could guess what Gao Xiong was thinking. He hurriedly kowtowed. "Family head, please understand. It was young Master Ruelong who told me to call for him the next morning. He told me to have him accompany us on a stroll around the city. I was only following orders. I didn't kill young Master Ruelong. Is that so? Who can testify for you?" The young one. The man's lips quivered, but he couldn't speak. When Gao Ruelong had told him about this, it really had been just the two of them. "Family head, please understand. This lowly one's strength is shallow. I've only just ascended to immortality. Young Master Ruelong is already an immortal king. How could this lowly one possibly kill him? So you're saying that no one can testify for you?" Gao Xiong ignored the servant's explanation. His eyes flashed with cold light. Chapter 1150. The murderer. Several heavily armored clansmen immediately walked out from the crowd. When the servant heard this, his eyes were filled with terror as he shouted angrily, "Family head, this lowly one didn't. It wasn't this lowly one. The family head is wise. Drag him away." Gao Xiong's eyes were bloodshot. The armored men grabbed him by the arms and dragged him out of the courtyard. The cries of the servants spread to the ears of everyone in the courtyard. The surrounding onlookers all kept quiet out of fear. Even they knew what was going on. Even they knew that this servant definitely wasn't Gao Ruelong's murderer. However, Gao Xiong had still convicted him of the cruelest of crimes, death by 1,000 cuts. First Gao Yunting's death, and now Gao Ruelong's, had caused him to lose all sense of reason. Who else came to Ruelong's residence between last night and this morning? The onlookers lowered their heads. If anyone dared to say anything, they'd die, no matter how they tried to explain themselves. "None of you are going to say anything?" Gao Xiong swept his cold gaze across the crowd, then pointed at the dead prostitute. "Who brought this woman here?" Quite a few of the onlookers nervously clenched their fists. These were the people who'd attended Gao Ruelong's banquet last night. Kai Renfei, who was standing not too far away, also frowned slightly. Sure enough, the older the ginger, the spicier it was, had locked onto the prostitute with a single glance. Quite a few people had known that he'd brought her here. He glanced at them. Think about it carefully. If anyone says anything, I'll pardon them. But if you don't and I find out, then everyone who knows about this will die. Gao Xiong's sinister tone struck at everyone's mental defenses. Finally, a young man in luxurious robes stepped forward. When he saw him, Kai Renfei's pupils constricted. It's Kai Renfei. Last night, we were drinking with young Master Ruelong. Kai Renfei was the one who brought this woman to him. His finger pointed at Kai Renfei's position, and the surrounding people immediately looked over. When he sensed everyone's gazes, especially Gao Xiong's sinister gaze, Kai Renfei couldn't help but gulp. After a brief moment of hesitation, he took a few steps outside. Reporting to Lord Patriarch, this prostitute was indeed given to Brother Ruelong by me. However, the woman I sent is only an ordinary person with no cultivation base. She's not a threat to Brother Ruelong. Moreover, Brother Ruelong was stabbed in the chest, so it was clearly an enemy attack from the front. If it was someone I sent, then how could Brother Ruelong have been hit? Also, the woman I sent died in the courtyard. Patriarch, please investigate this matter clearly. Renfei is innocent. That makes sense. When Gao Xiong heard this, he nodded calmly. Kai Renfei squeezed out a smile, only to discover that Gao Xiong's expression had suddenly changed. But what if Ruelong doesn't resist? Lord Patriarch, she really is just an ordinary prostitute. But if she had a top-grade immortal item and tricked Ruelong into binding her hands and feet, would she be able to succeed? Gulp. Hearing this analysis, Kai Renfei immediately swallowed his saliva. Word for word, Gao Xiong's analysis was spot on. Speechless? Men, drag Kai Renfei away and execute him. As soon as he finished speaking, some of the surrounding soldiers stepped forward to drag Kai Renfei away. However, at that moment Li Lu, who'd been sitting on the ground this entire time, suddenly looked up and roared at the armored soldiers. Stay your hand! A sharp cry rang out from Li Lu's mouth, and the armored soldiers also stopped, not daring to move recklessly. What are you all standing around for? Is she the patriarch, or am I? Gao Xiong roared. The armored soldiers hurried forward, but to their surprise, a dagger suddenly appeared in Li Lu's hand. She pressed it against her neck. Gao Xiong, Kai Renfei is my son. I've already lost Ruelong. I can't lose him as well. If you dare kill him, I'll die right here and now. The dagger in her hand moved a little closer to her neck, and there was already a faint trace of blood flowing down along the dagger on her fair neck. When he saw this, Gao Xiong turned pale with fright and hurriedly said, Madam, you can't. Release Renfei. Li Lu didn't budge an inch. Seeing that she was threatening to kill herself, Gao Xiong hesitated for a moment, then sighed and waved his hand at the armored men. You may leave. Kai Renfei, whose heart was already in his throat, also knelt on the ground with a bang and kowtowed vigorously. Thank you for sparing my life, Patriarch. Gao Xiong glared at the kneeling Kai Renfei, but didn't say a word. He'd rather kill 1,000 innocents than let one go. As far as Gao Xiong was concerned, Kai Renfei was definitely the murderer. Moreover, he definitely had a motive. But Li Lu was the only person he treasured. He couldn't let her die. Madam, why go to such lengths? He sighed and walked up to Li Lu. His palm brimmed with immortal spiritual energy, and he placed it against her neck. Before long, the bloody wound on her neck transformed into a new pink scar. It wouldn't be long before it disappeared. It wouldn't affect her in the slightest. Her hand caressed Gao Ruelong's cheek, but at that moment, open Ruelong's hands. Hurried over to Gao Ruelong's side. He bowed deeply to Gao Ruelong, muttered an apology, then opened Gao Ruelong's hands. In the palm of his left hand there was a piece of cloth that he was gripping tightly. Patriarch. Hurriedly handed the rag over to Gao Xiong. He unfolded the rag to reveal a light blue cloth with a white edge at the corner. This corner was clearly the corner of a pattern or symbol. Patriarch, the owner of this cloth should be young Master Ruelong's murderer, said Ai. Gao Xiong nodded faintly, then handed the rag to Ai and said, You're not going to be able to use it. Go investigate. Find out which faction this person belongs to. Your subordinate understands. Ai grabbed the cloth and left the crowd. Little did he know, Gao Xiong smiled bitterly to himself. What a despicable method. Based on his many years of experience, he could tell that someone had maliciously framed him. Of course, that didn't eliminate the possibility that they really were the culprit. However, the former was more likely. Still, this was his only lead. Yunting had died because the Xiao family wanted him dead. As his father, he'd had no choice. In the end, he hadn't even been able to bury him. Now that Rue Long was dead, there was no way he could swallow his anger. If he did, he'd be the same Gao Xiong who could make the entire Sky Great District tremble with a stomp of his foot. A quarter-hour later, Ai hurried over and whispered into Gao Xiong's ear. When he heard Ai's words, Gao Xiong's expression changed. After a moment's hesitation, he gnashed his teeth and roared, Assemble the army! Assemble the army! Attack upheaval! It was better to kill 1,000 innocents than to let one go.